Welcome, wrestling fans, to the Pro Wrestle Machine. Let's jump right into it. September 25, 2000 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. WWF moving to Viacom. WCW Fall Brawl reviewed. More. By Dave Meltzer. The Delaware Supreme Court on September 18 ruled 3-0 not to overturn the Chancery Court ruling that the WWF would be able to accept the Viacom deal, and thus ending its 17-year relationship with the USA Network. The decision was more than 1 month in the making, which left much of the entire pro wrestling industry, and both networks, paralyzed to an extent, certainly as it pertained to wrestling programming. TNN had cancelled ECW, and ECW had begun negotiations with USA Network, but as part of its agreements with both networks, WWF had exclusivity on the network. Since the WWF had signed the contract to start with Viacom, starting with Raw on TNN on September 25, and the original court decision upheld that, they were contractually bound to the move. ECW's final show on TNN is set for September 22. On September 15, with the court still not having made the decision and a possibility that none of the three parties would have wanted looming, that being WWF would make the move without adequate publicity, and a week or two later, the Supreme Court would rule in favor of USA, causing WWF to have to move back to USA. Lawyers for USA and Viacom were meeting to delay the move, possibility through late October, which would both give the court time to make a decision. It would also enable Viacom, if the decision went in its favor, adequate time to promote the move. Viacom had earmarked close to $7 million in its contract with WWF to promote the switch over. While the vast majority of the advertising wasn't planned to hit until the 6-day period between September 19 and September 25, the preparation of the promotional campaign had to largely be in place 6 weeks earlier. Much of the preparation was continually delayed because they were waiting for the court decision to come. On the September 18 Raw, the final show on USA, Jim Ross mentioned on numerous occasions that it would be the final episode of Raw on the network and mentioned, on the air, that Raw would be moving to TNN next week. They thanked the USA Network for their support. They did mention the first TNN show would feature Austin on live. Austin will also appear live on the pay-per-view the previous night, but hyped nothing else. There were no commercials or video features, driving the point home stronger. While Viacom will bombard all forms of media with as much publicity as possible in a short period of time to promote the Raw debut, as well as the debuts of Livewire on September 30 on TNN, Superstars on October 1 on TNN, and WWF Heat on October 1 on MTV, it will be impossible to get the amount of promotion originally planned. The next morning, Tom Freston, the chairman of MTV Networks, announced that TNN would be renamed the National Network and base most of its operations out of New York, moving from Nashville. It would debut a new network logo next week and change its programming to a more general entertainment format targeting a younger and more diverse demographic, including the development of original series and movies and attempt to acquire more sports and outdoor programming. Herb Scannell, president of Nickelodeon and TV Land, will replace David Hall as president of the new network, which will have the WWF, the highest-rated weekly programming year-round on cable, as its base. This move, with little notice to the general public, gives WCW a golden opportunity on September 25 to at least inch up temporarily, since Raw is moving from the number 1 rated primetime cable network to the number 15 rated. Even though WWF is destination programming, meaning people tune in specifically to see the show rather than benefiting from strong lead-ins, that move in the short run is going to probably hurt ratings. In the long run, being part of the Viacom conglomerate gives the company so many promotional advantages when it comes to cross-promotion that any short-term loss of ratings will probably more than be made up for. Nitro, emanating from the Nassau Coliseum, and has already promoted a Nitro show featuring a Booker T vs. Vince Russo title match, a tag team battle royal to crown new champions. Rey Mysterio Jr. and Juventud Guerrera were stripped of them on Nitro, and a missed WCW beauty contest. ECW may reap the greatest benefits of all with the switch. The company, financially strapped under the current circumstances, while losing its TNN deal, which wasn't strong enough for the company to be profitable, has the chance to move to a stronger station and thus garner more exposure. Even though TNN would have likely rescinded ECW's cancellation had USA won the appeal, such a decision could have doomed ECW, which needs a stronger network, a consistent time slot, and most importantly, outside financial support to alleviate the company's debts at a time when the financial squeeze has just gotten so tight, with the company missing payroll and canceling its past weekend house shows. ECW has been negotiating for a Saturday night 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. time slot, but it isn't clear just how soon, if and when the deal is finalized, that it could be put on the air. WWF's history on USA Network dates back to the founding of the network in 1982. USA was originated as a national version of the Madison Square Garden Network, which aired WWF shows monthly generally from Madison Square Garden dating back to the inception of the MSG network in the late 70s. USA Network's relationship with WWF started with airing major arena house shows on a once or twice a month basis, usually MSG shows but occasionally shows from the Capitol Center in Landover, Maryland. The relationship became weekly in late 1983, when the WWF got the time slot formerly occupied by Southwest Championship Wrestling on Sunday mornings, which was kicked off the network for a combination of being behind paying bills and an angle involving one wrestler pouring cow dung on another. WWF took over the time slot with a show called All American Wrestling, which originally aired tapes now only from WWF, but from many of the regional promotions that would send the tapes in, not realizing McMahon wasn't giving their wrestlers national exposure to help their company. Those same wrestlers highlighted on those tapes became the original wrestlers targeted by McMahon at the same time to raid for his national expansion, which began a couple of months later. By 1984, it expanded to the weekly 2-hour prime-time wrestling and Tuesday Night Titans, a variety wrestling show, along with the weekend show. TNT got strong ratings in the early part of the wrestling boom, but then got stale, the ratings dwindled and the show was canceled. With the taped prime-time wrestling, which featured long slow-paced arena-style matches, dropping in the ratings in the early 90s, a 1-hour fast-paced Monday Night Raw was created, which would air live every other week, originally from the Manhattan Center until expanding to being a touring phenomenon, and taped the second week. Raw became a ratings hit, but ratings eroded from late 1995 through early 1997 when Nitro went head-to-head and quickly became the most lively, faster-paced, more state-of-the-art in-ring product and the higher-rated show. After Nitro expanded to 2 hours, Raw followed suit. When Nitro went to 3 hours, Raw didn't follow suit. By the late 90s, USA Network nearly canceled Raw and dropped the entire WWF package due to the dwindling ratings, which at the time would have been a catastrophic blow to the company. But WWF made a big comeback with a new concept and 2 years later became the hottest commodity on cable television. USA's contract for WWF programming expired this month, but the network had the right of first refusal on any offer to retain the programming. Viacom made a huge offer, which included promotion on Viacom television and radio stations, which include CBS, TNN, MTV, Nickelodeon, VH1, UPN, Showtime and CMT, on billboards and in theme parks, plus developmental of TV and radio specials, book deals with Simon & Schuster, and potential TV series and theme park attractions. After WWF announced its deal with Viacom, USA Network then announced it was renewing the WWF, taking the legal strategy that the contract allows them to retain the programming as long as they meet the deal for the programming itself, feeling they didn't have to meet non-programming deals. They agreed to meet the $28 million annual price tag that Viacom had offered for the 4 weekly shows, up from the $5.2 million that USA was paying on its existing deal. The court on the legal issue ruled in the USA Network's favor, saying they only had to meet the part of the deal as related to the 4 shows, but ruled they hadn't met that deal because they didn't agree to not preempt Raw, which Viacom agreed TNN wouldn't do, and lost the case, leading to the appeal. Technically, USA could appeal this decision, but it would be in a losing cause, because it would go to a 5-judge panel on the Delaware Supreme Court, 3 of whom would be the same judges that ruled against them in this case. So even if they were able to convince the remaining 2 judges to rule in their favor, they would still lose the appeal 3-2. The scary scene on a live pay-per-view on September 17th of 52-year-old Paul Orndorff, practically motionless, collapsing in the ring in something that wasn't scripted, brought up a situation regarding the top pro wrestling mindset that needs changing. The good news is that Orndorff's injury, a severe stinger caused by jarring of the spine and spinal cord which left him without movement temporarily, did not leave any permanent damage. Orndorff was treated at the Buffalo Hospital and released hours later and able to return home to the Atlanta area. The injury and its effects were very similar to the injury suffered by Steve Austin at SummerSlam in 1997 after an errant tombstone piledriver from Owen Hart, which was nearly career-ending and was a major factor in Austin having to take a full year off wrestling this past year for neck and spine surgery. The scene as it happened was scarily reminiscent of similar situations in recent years with Buff Bagwell and Darren Drozdov, which turned out to be far more serious, where wrestlers were in the ring unable to move after an in-ring miscue. Drozdov remains wheelchair-bound to this day. One of the unfortunate byproducts of the current wrestling mentality is that even though nothing was said about this on the script, because so many swerves are thrown on pay-per-view at the people in the company, many thought this was just another angle at first. particularly since, in the case of Bagwell, they had actually teased angles almost identical in the past. In all the aforementioned cases, even though it was clear something very serious had taken place, the mentality taught within pro wrestling is above everything: never drop the facade of the show in front of the audience. With Bagwell, luckily, the match was over. With Drozdov, there was simply no alternative because he couldn't move, and then it did stop the action. With Chuck Austin, who ended up a $25 million plus verdict in a lawsuit against the WWF for an incident, they kept the match going, actually moved his body to ready him for a splash off the top rope finish even though he couldn't move after taking a rocker dropper wrong. In the most scary of cases, involving the late Luther Lindsay a generation ago, and Gary Albright earlier this year, the opponents, while the more famous wrestler was suffering a fatal heart attack, still maneuvered themselves into being pinned, and literally the last thing in both of their lives was scoring a win in a worked pro wrestling match. This was probably a mentality that had some merits, or at least more merits, as whether it was right even in the past is open for debate, given the basics of the business of the past when it was sold as something real, and not wanting to ever break that fantasy in front of the audience. But in today's day and age, when fans are fully aware it's a show and the scripts themselves constantly break that fantasy, to continue matches when someone is in clear need of legit medical attention no longer serves a purpose, as both the Austin Hart match continued and Hart basically pinned himself immediately to lose the title as was prescribed in that match's storyline. In this case, the wrestlers in the ring basically panicked and started working high spots on one side of the ring while EMTs and trainer Danny Young were feverishly attending to Orndorff on the other side while the ring was jarring from bumps. A little under 2 minutes after Orndorff collapsed, ref Charles Robinson took charge and ordered the match stopped, against the script which had several minutes more, including run-ins, to play out. The injury occurred about 14:45 into an elimination tag match. Orndorff didn't tag in once during the first 13 minutes, before being a focal part of the match with a hot tag-like roll against his protégés from the power plant. There was a mistiming as he went to give Mark Jindrak a piledriver. Apparently Jindrak didn't jump right for the move, which caused Orndorff to have to lift a deceptively large, 6'6", 260-pound, man up. According to one report, as Orndorff lifted the guy dead weight, his hamstring went out. He then was forced to shift the body to compensate for the first injury, which caused a twinge in his neck, and he collapsed on the mat with a condition of almost a temporary paralysis, lying on the mat motionless. Orndorff's problems with that side of his body date back some 14 years. During his big money run with Hulk Hogan in 1986, which is still from an attendance standpoint, the biggest house show feud in WWF history, he developed nerve damage which caused his right arm to atrophy greatly. He continued to work because of the big money involved, but physically was never the same and eventually retired from wrestling in 1987. Since Orndorff was such a major star, wrestling news was in the dark ages for the most part, and he had suddenly disappeared. This led to widespread rumors of his death, which actually continued for a while even when he started making appearances a few years later on the indie scene. Orndorff worked indies for a few years, before becoming a regular with Smoky Mountain Wrestling, which led to his joining WCW when Bill Watts was in charge. He continued to wrestle for WCW as a regular through 1994, when the pounding forced him to undergo neck surgery, which ended his career, this time apparently permanently. He worked in a variety of capacities with the company, mainly as a road agent, before taking on the position as the head instructor at the power plant. Physically in recent months, with the exception of the right arm, which never recovered its size and strength, he actually looked more muscular than virtually everyone in the business in training for this latest comeback. It's one thing when trained somewhat healthy young pro wrestlers get hurt on a weekly basis. It's another when companies put untrained wrestlers, or wrestlers with serious injuries where they shouldn't wrestle, into the ring, as the injury rate for this group is a lot higher because of the lack of training to protect themselves, or the existing injuries. This also brings up question as to Nitro this coming week with the Booker T vs. Russo match. Russo is just a few weeks out from suffering a concussion, so taking any head trauma in the match would be a huge mistake. Being that it is pro wrestling, one can work around an injury. They could do a bait and switch swerve, which could be considered false advertising, but the rules of wrestling are such that false advertising is expected, and it isn't like they are manipulating fans to buy tickets because it's not a ticket-selling match. Since the match was announced, there was no movement whatsoever in ticket sales for Nassau Coliseum, which stood at about 2,600 at press time, like advertising Steve Austin for a pay-per-view knowing he's too injured to perform. Or they can do a non-match, which being that it's a TV taping may or may not affect future business in that arena, but they do have the right to kill their future business in cities, as they've done for years in numerous markets, without governmental interference. But more, it becomes a question regarding regulation of wrestling in the state of New York, in an industry that has at times courted injury by putting untrained people in the position to be injured, which they frequently are. There was already a major tragedy in New York with Drozdov, one that was unavoidable because it was a basic bump with two wrestlers who certainly trained to do it. There was nearly a second with Orndorff, just 1 week ago, who, hindsight being 20/20, should not have been allowed to participate both because of his age and the condition of his neck, but he still was better trained and probably less of an injury risk than many of the women they have doing and taking hurricane ranas. And the reality is, a full medical exam on Orndorff, it was done and he was cleared medically, that's one thing. But exercising caution in a company that has had a ridiculous amount of tragedies over the past 3 years should probably become a priority. Masakazu Fukuda, whose continued wrestling after cerebral hemorrhages was medically cleared, and he died making his last comeback this year. So again, medical clearance isn't perfect either, and there are going to be tragedies just because of the nature of the profession with trained guys. If Russo can put on something that doesn't put himself in danger, that's fine. If there is going to be any regulation of the condition of people who can participate, certainly a few concussions in a short period of time, as Russo has supposedly suffered, is a lot more dangerous than most conditions. And unless he takes bumps and tries to work a match, it's probably not nearly as significant a call as putting Kurt Angle back at the last pay-per-view to work a finish, and then take bumps the next 2 nights, all after suffering a concussion in the first part of a pay-per-view match, which also points to the existing pro wrestling mentality. Again, being that it is pro wrestling, you do have to work hurt at some point and you can't walk off the field from a minor injury. But football players and boxers, which are worlds that should be more brutal than pro wrestling because they are shoots, would not allow play to continue for minutes when someone is clearly in condition where they can't perform, nor would they put someone with 3 recent concussions back on the field without clearance. There are pro wrestlers under 25 who have had triple the number of concussions as Steve Young, but nobody cares because they are wrestlers. If the commission is going to stop people from working due to medical conditions at any point, as they have numerous times, certainly Orndorff posed higher risk factors between his years of inactivity, his chronological age, and more so the condition of his neck, getting into the ring than most of the wrestlers the commission has stopped from getting into the ring in the past. Russo's risk factors are different than Orndorff's, but if he's really done a half-dozen wrestling matches in the last year and had 3 concussions, which is the claim, and you are far more susceptible to them during the period after suffering one, which is why they would never let a boxer in that condition perform. And wrestling has completely different dangers than boxing, but overall it probably no less dangerous. Aside from the Orndorff scare, the Fall Brawl show had to be considered a solid success as far as show presentation. By and large, the matches were better than they appeared on paper, and the crowd, which started off very cold to the product, seemed to warm up as the show went going. The show had its flaws and a few bad matches, but the Bill Goldberg vs. Scott Steiner match had to be considered a major success with a great performance by both wrestlers and a largely strong storyline, even if the multitude of bat and pipe shots was overdone. A crowd of 8,638 attended the show at the HSBC Arena in Buffalo, New York, which was 4,311 paying $128,010, so whatever recent gains in exposure level by going unopposed and having the strong rating the previous week meant nothing as far as ticket sales. It always helps to have a good show, but even when it dragged, Scott Hudson seemed to put on his best performance as an announcer, largely due to his underrated quick wit, and maybe having 2 weeks off due to the birth of his first child allowed him to replenish plenty of new material. However, one of the strangest things on the show was seeing Dick Bayer, along with his wife and Billy Red Lions, 5 rows in facing the hard camera at ringside wearing his destroyer mask. He was there all night in almost every shot, which was so strange seeing a fan in the audience with a destroyer mask. The results of both main events were largely given away in the pre-game show. Goldberg, during his interview, said that he couldn't guarantee a win, saying he didn't know if he could win, but if he were to lose it would be due to outside interference, and even then the fans would know who the real winner is. Nash, during his interview, said that he hung out at the bar all night and had a major hangover. He tried to an extent to use it to push the match, saying that when you have a hangover you're mad, and he was going to take his anger out on Booker, but it was clearly to set the stage for his loss. 1. Elix skipper pinned Pee Wee Allen Funk in 11:03 to retain the WCW Cruiserweight title. They botched up a leapfrog spot early when Skipper didn't get low enough. Not much heat. For the record, Skipper never played Canadian football, nor is he Canadian. He did a top rope Asai moonsault and nearly killed cameraman Jackie Crockett in the process. The Thrillers all came out and Mike Sanders hit Pee Wee with a stick to the knees. Skipper worked over the knee and then got the pin with his overdrive, which looked perfect given he was working with someone he broke in with at the power plant. 2 stars. 2. Corporal Cajun Mark LaRue, and Lieutenant Loco, Salvador Guerrero 3, and Sergeant A. Wool, Jerry Toot, beat Evan Karagias, Evan Cavagias, and Shannon Moore and Shane Helms in 10:25. 3 Count came out and started singing and did their original song all the way through. God, it was awful. Finally the MIA came out to give it a mercy killing. Match itself started out rough with some missed spots, but built to a real good finish. It was very reminiscent of an undercard match with less experienced wrestlers in Mexico. Crowd wasn't into it early, kind of like one of those lucha matches where they kind of fall apart and the crowd can sense it. Helms was the star, looking great. Moore did a flip dive out of the ring. Loco did a plancha. Karagias did a springboard crossbody outside the ring. Helms superkicked A. Wool through a table as he literally held Moore up by his hair in the air, which looked terribly uncomfortable. Cajun pinned Helms to win the match. 2 3/4 stars. 3. Ron and Don Harris beat Chronic, Brian Adams and Brian Clark, in a first blood chain match in 6:37. Ron was chained to Clark and Don to Adams. Crowd was dead for this match as well. They brawled into the crowd. Ref Billy Silverman got bumped and didn't see Ron bleeding. Don undid the chain and hit Adams with a barbed wire bat. Silverman awoke and saw Adams bleeding and ruled the twins as the winners. Chronic cleaned house after and used the high times on Silverman. 1/2 star. 4. Lance Storm Lance Evers, pinned General Rection, William DeMott, in 6:46. They announced Jim Duggan as the special enforcer referee outside the ring. Pretty much everyone saw this turn coming. Better than average match ending with Duggan hitting Rection with a 2x4 as he went up to do his moonsault and Storm got the submission with the half crab. 2 1/4 stars. 5. Disco Inferno Glenn Gilberti, and Big Vito, Vito Lograsso, and Rey Mysterio Jr., Oscar Gutierrez, and Juventud Guerrera Eduardo Anibal Gonzalez, and Conan, Charles Ashenoff, and Tigress, Vanessa Sanchez, and Paul Orndorff went to a no contest with Mark Jindrak and Sean O'Hare and Mike Sanders and Chuck Palumbo in Reno. Rick Cornell, and Johnny the Bull, John Huger, and Sean Stasiak, Sean Stepich, in an elimination match in 16:34 when ref Charles Robinson stopped it legitimately against the script when Orndorff was seemingly badly injured. Sanders and Stasiak were actually never in the match, although both were scheduled for short stints at the finish. Conan, without medical clearance, came in and did some spots right off, while Tigress never really did much. She was also scheduled for spots at the finish, and Orndorff never tagged in until late in the match. Orndorff was brought in with a towel covering his head doing a mystery partner gimmick. First fall was at 6 minutes when Inferno accidentally hit Conan with the stunner, Last Dance, and O'Hare pinned him. Conan did a few spots, but that was it right before losing as the first 5 minutes on the face side were Disco, Mysterio, and Guerrera. Reno pinned Disco with a new version of Snake Eyes, as opposed to the version Nash used later in the show, which is similar to Matt Hardy's Twist of Fate in 6:53. The gimmick was that Vito and Mysterio and Guerrero were mad at Disco screwing up and costing them the fall that they wouldn't let Disco tag out. Orndorff gave Vito the stickball bat, but before he could use it, Palumbo hit Vito with his own stickball bat and Reno pinned Vito after the Snake Eyes in 8:43. The FA team, down 3-0, won a fall when Guerrero used the Juvie driver on Reno and Mysterio followed with a leg drop to the groin off the top and both pinned Reno in 10:45. The bout started falling apart at this point. Guerrero did a springboard crossbody outside the ring, but Jindrak and O'Hare both caught him on the floor and gave him their patented world's highest Juvie hip toss into the ring, and O'Hare pinned Guerrero after the Shanton bomb in 12:08. Orndorff finally tagged in at this point. Johnny also tagged in and tried to use a kendo stick, but Orndorff got it, used it, and scored a pin in 13:28 with the pile driver. While Orndorff physically was huge and ripped, aside from his bad arm, for any age, let alone 52, he facially looked old and his movement in the ring, particularly his punches, looked really sad, particularly for a guy who in his day was a great performer. He tried to piledriver, Jindrak collapsed. Everyone kept working but not knowing what to do until finally Robinson stopped the match. 1.5 star. 6. Shane Douglas, Troy Martin, and Tori Wilson beat Medusa, Deborah Michelli Blackman, and Billy Kidman Peter Gruner in a scaffold match in 5:01. Douglas did a promo before the match, and in an example of somewhat being in his own world, talked about how he was going to leave Kidman in the same state Orndorff was just left in. Whether we're reading too much into it or not, Wilson just glared at him with this "what an asshole" look before breaking into her on-camera smile. They put the four on a scaffold near the entrance, with a totally padded stage to cushion the bumps. The scaffold was much wider than any scaffold match and seemed to be safer because there was more surface area, and little danger from the fall because of how gimmicked it was. Still, the match was terrible and served zero purpose. Wilson was still scared to death up there. They were raised a legit 15 feet above the stage. In wrestling, calling 15 feet a 20-foot drop is actually very conservative. Wilson never even wanted to stand up. Douglas and Kidman didn't seem scared at all, and with the bigger surface could even do spots including a power slam by Douglas and even a franchiser. Still no heat. Medusa tried to climb down, but Douglas kicked her and she took a backward bump a la Shane McMahon into an obvious huge air mattress of sorts. The crowd didn't care in the least, recognizing how gimmicked it was. Actually, fans booed the fall. With the fans lightly booing, the announcers tried to compare the injuries Medusa must have had with those legit ones Orndorff just had, which was bad on many levels. Kidman then, with no build-up, no drama, no nothing, took a bump off the scaffold to lose. Wilson never took the bump as was originally scheduled when the match was designed. Good for her. It wouldn't have meant anything in this context anyway, even though it wouldn't have been that dangerous. -1 star. Jarrett attacked Sting during an interview, which played into Sting attacking Jarrett later in the show. Mike Tenay did an interview with David Flair taped the previous day. It was said to be from Flair's house. It was actually the home of cameraman Woody Curse. For a David Flair segment with no outside help, it was really funny. David acted like he thought the father was walking around the premises. Tenay noted that Rick got mad at the question, but never officially denied it. David didn't want to let Tenay in his house in the first place but did because Tenay was alone, which was hilarious because there was an obvious cameraman. Flair said he thought Reed was the father. The skit ended with David chasing the mailman thinking he was the father, and knocking him down, sending mail all over the grass, and putting him in the figure 4. Not only was that funny, that was all David's idea. 7. Sting, Steve Borden, won a 3-way over Vampiro Ian Hodgkinson, and Great Muta, Keiji Muto, in 5:12. ICP came out to announce most of the match with Madden, which was funny for a few minutes. They kept interfering as well as messing up Sting, Muta and Shivani's names. Some mistimed stuff. Vampiro and Muta worked together doubling on Sting until Muta did his moonsault, ouch, on those crippled knees of his. Vampiro broke up Muta's pin. ICP got in the ring to stop Muta and Vampiro from going at it. Sting got a baseball bat and hit everyone in sight. Sting hit Muta in the back, and to show what a devastating weapon it was, Muta didn't even feel it enough to register, but when he recognized it was the finished bat shot, he went down for the Scorpion Death Drop. Shaggy then went to the top rope for a leg drop on Muta, but Sting then saved Muta. Dud. 8. Mike Alfonso beat Jeff Jarrett in a bunkhouse brawl in 9:04. Awesome came out of the Partridge Family bus with former child actor Gary Coleman, who at last word was working as a security guard for $6 an hour, so at least WCW probably didn't have to overspend to get him. Jarrett spent a long interview running down the Buffalo Bills. There were about 10 players sitting at ringside including All-Stars Reuben Brown and Eric Moulds. WCW was under the impression that two far bigger mainstream names, Jim Kelly and Doug Flutie, would be part of this angle. Awesome set up a power bomb off the ropes through a table spot, but Jarrett flipped him over and basically Awesome took a back body drop through a table shoulder first. After Awesome missed a splash off the ropes, the Bills hit the ring. With Jarrett distracted, Awesome hit his Awesome bomb, but Jarrett kicked out. The Bills were supposed to disappear at this point and leave the spotlight for Coleman, but it didn't happen, so Coleman, being so small, had to sneak between all the 300-plus pounders who dwarfed Awesome, let alone Jarrett and Coleman. Coleman got no pop coming off the bus, but got a big pop for the low blow. He was far less annoying than the WWF more modern mini-celebrity Joe C., who cost ENC the tag belts a few months back. Jarrett hit Coleman with a guitar, but Sting then interfered, giving Jarrett the Scorpion Death Drop, so basically, it took about 14 guys to pin Jarrett. Coleman was hilarious because he was wearing a hat with a big towel underneath to cushion the guitar blow, and during the melee in the ring, that hat came off and the towel came out. Before taking the shot, he calmly got the hot and put the towel back in and braced for the shot. 3 stars. 9. Scott reached Steiner, defeated Bill Goldberg in 1350. Steiner wore a face guard, but that didn't seem to slow him down, nor stop Goldberg from throwing a few stiff blows near the face. Even though a lot of strength moves in pro wrestling are a gimmick, the way Goldberg was throwing Steiner around, that man is freaky strong. He did a press overhead and power slam with ease. Goldberg injured his shoulder at this point, which makes it even more impressive he had the best match of his career. After another power slam, Midaja returned. Steiner hit Goldberg with a chair shot and Goldberg juiced. He did an overhead belly to belly. Midaja gave Steiner a supposed lead pipe, which even little Midaja was able to swing like it was a wiffle ball bat, and Goldberg speared Steiner but also hit the pipe. Vince Russo came out and hit Goldberg 3 times with a bat, but Goldberg kicked out of the pin. Steiner power-bombed Goldberg through a table and put him in the recliner, but Goldberg dramatically made the ropes. He put it on a second time, but Goldberg powered out and stood up and dropped him backwards. Midaja again hit Goldberg with a pipe, badly I might add, so Russo hit Goldberg as well as did Midaja, which all came off as somewhat botched. Steiner did a belly-to-belly superplex with Goldberg landing somewhat on his head. He put on the recliner for a third time. Wasn't that move banned by the cat? Did I miss the reinstatement of it? But Goldberg made the ropes. Goldberg then went after Russo, which gave Steiner the opportunity for a pipe shot and another recliner, this time with Goldberg passing out from the pain and losing. The Bills all hit the ring and helped take Goldberg out. 4.25 stars. 10. Booker T. Booker Huffman pinned Kevin Nash in a cage match to regain the WCW title in 9:02. Nash wore his outsider's pants. Nash worked harder than usual, although that's not to say this match was good. Nash did juice from a spot where his head connected with the exposed metal of a turnbuckle, which he removed the pad from. Totally anticlimactic end of the show after the previous match. Finish saw T block the powerbomb and hit the Uranage and score a clean pin. 1.5 star. Professor Toru Tanaka, one of the country's leading heels in the late 60s and for much of the 70s, passed away back on August 22 from a heart attack at the age of 70 in his home city of Lake Forest, California. Although this happened several weeks ago, for some reason the information got no media play until it was reported in a feature story in the Honolulu Star Bulletin on September 15. Tanaka, whose real name was Charles Kalani Jr., was a powerhouse Hawaiian who was billed as a salt-throwing Japanese star, which was actually commonplace in wrestling in those days. The vast majority of the Japanese heels from that era were actually Hawaiian, some of Japanese ancestry, including Duke Kyomika, Oddjob Tosh Togo, Mr. Moto and Mitsu Arakawa, who wrestled barefoot, which caused most of them ankle problems later in their careers, worked almost exclusively as heels. Wrestling even 30 years later was trying to gain heat from replaying World War II, and largely based their offense around martial arts moves, in particular the 2 illegal spots that were the classic finishes, the karate chops to the throat and salt throwing to the eyes. Tanaka was best known in the old Worldwide Wrestling Federation as a singles opponent for Bruno Sammartino and later for his perennial tag team championship team with fellow Hawaiian Mr. Fuji, Harry Fujiwara, easily the territory's dominant team of the decade. He also, as his wrestling career wound down, because of his size and menacing facials, made the jump to playing a huge Japanese martial arts style heel on both the big screen and on television, reminiscent of roles a decade earlier that another powerhouse Hawaiian pro wrestler, Harold Sakata, Oddjob Tosh Togo, would get. In fact, the two were often confused with one another. Tanaka had significant roles in more than 20 movies including Perfect Weapon, Running Man, Last Action Hero and Missing in Action 2. Born on January 6, 1930 in Honolulu, the son of a Hawaiian father and a part Chinese mother, he began in the martial arts at the age of 9, working his way up to a Danzan Ryu black belt in Jiu-Jitsu. Hanging out with a bad crowd, his life was going in a negative direction until the local football coach channeled his aggressions into the game. He became a high school football star in Honolulu as an offensive lineman and a place kicker in 1946-47. Kalani Jr. attended Weber Junior College, now Weber State University in Ogden, Utah on a football scholarship from 1948-52. He met his wife in college and was married in 1953 for 34 years until divorcing her at the same time his wrestling career ended. The couple had 3 children. After football, he started training in Utah as a heavyweight boxer, but that went nowhere and he was drafted into the U.S. Army in 1955. He served for 12 years, largely as a jiu-jitsu instructor and as a gun expert. While being stationed in Monterey, California, he snuck out and began wrestling for Roy Shire, and was considered a natural to make it big because of his look. Starting out briefly as Charlie Kalani, he soon was transformed into Professor Toru Tanaka when he left the Army, and brought very early in his career into Australia. He started out extremely late in the business at the age of 36, and was the almost 1 in 1,000 long shot who started so late that was still able to have a relatively long and successful career. About the only other wrestler of modern times who could fit that description would be Bad News Allen. Because of his weighing about 270 pounds with powerful upper body and a tremendous face for a pro wrestling heel, he was an immediate headliner and one of the few rookies in pro wrestling history to hold a major version of the World Heavyweight title. He wrestled from 1965 through 1987, although he wrestled sparingly in those finals years after switching over to acting in 1981. He was a top star literally from day one because of his short, powerful physique and the gimmick of being a Japanese Superman with vicious chops. As a rookie in Australia, he was given the ring name by Jim Barnett and Duke Kyomika, whose real last time, ironically, was Tanaka. He was named after a Japanese war hero the two had looked up in a history book. He was very impressive in his ability to chop through many boards as a demonstration, with the gimmick that if his chop could go through so many boards, imagine the damage it would do on the human body. And his opponents always sold the chop big, and when it went to the throat, it was sold as being next to deadly. He used the chop through all the boards, which wasn't commonplace in those days, to impress everyone to get over immediately in every territory, as well as doing so in TV and movies to get over as a menacing heel set up to feed the top babyface even at an advanced age because he remained huge on shows like the A-Team when his wrestling career wound down. In only his first year in the business, he captured the world title for Barnett's World Championship Wrestling promotion on June 3, 1966 from Dominic DeNucci, a huge drawing ethnic babyface at the time. He was spotted by Bruno Sammartino while on tour, and Sammartino convinced Vince McMahon Sr. that he'd be a big money draw and had him brought into the WWF for a headline position. He remained a top star through the 70s, although by his final WWF run with Fuji in the late 70s, he had slowed down in the ring because of age and later, an ankle injury took the rest of his mobility away and moved him out of the top tier. When McMahon Sr. wanted to bring back the stereotypical salt-throwing Japanese tag team in 1981, he replaced Tanaka with an actual Japanese wrestler, Masa Saito, as Fuji's partner. During his early career as a singles headliner in the WWF, Australia and Texas in particular, he was portrayed as an almost unbeatable martial arts champion. Tanaka, who wrestled the slow style that was in vogue in the Northeast during that period, which also made it tough to have staying power on top in the territories built around workers, debuted in Madison Square Garden on March 27, 1967, getting a few undercard victories before shooting a television angle on May 1, 1967 in Washington, D.C., where he pinned Sammartino in a television match, although Sammartino was under the ropes. This set up a Madison Square Garden show on June 19, 1967, where he lost via DQ to Sammartino before 11,515 fans. He remained a main event performer on the East Coast for some time, with two more main events in a tag team with Gorilla Monsoon against Sammartino and Spiros Arion. He also remained one of Sammartino's major opponents, working programs in Boston, Philadelphia, Washington, D.C., and Baltimore, which were the company's secondary markets behind New York. After he and Monsoon defeated Bill Miller and Al Costello in the semifinal on October 23, 1967 before a poorhouse of 6,612 headlined by Sammartino vs. Hans Mortier, he was given another main event with Sammartino on January 29, 1968, the final wrestling show ever in the old Madison Square Garden, which drew 14,130 fans. It was the second largest crowd in Madison Square Garden between March of 1966 and January of 1970, behind only a Sammartino vs. Monsoon singles match. Tanaka remained a fixture in Madison Square Garden with singles matches against the likes of Dominic DeNucci, Spiros Arion, Victor Rivera, as well as teaming with Monsoon and against teams like Bobo Brazil and Earl Maynard, Brazil and Rivera. Sammartino and Rivera in his first Northeast run, which lasted through the summer of 1968, as well as moving his singles program in 1968 to Pittsburgh and Toronto. On that first WWF campaign, he headlined MSG on 5 occasions. He returned to the WWF in the spring of 1969 in yet another MSG main event on May 14, 1969, teaming with Killer Kowalski and losing to Sammartino and Rivera before 7,670. Although he never headlined MSG with Sammartino, they worked as a headline program in many of the secondary markets from April through November. At this point he formed a heel Japanese tag team with Arakawa, called the Rising Suns, generally working second from the top at MSG and headlining most other arenas as the short-lived WWF International Tag Team Champions after a win over Rivera and Haystacks Calhoun on June 30, 1969 in Madison Square Garden. The two defended against Rivera and Antonio Pugliese and DeNucci and Pugliese in the Garden before losing them to Rivera and Tony Marino on December 8, 1969. He remained in the mid-card through the fall of 1970. He left for Texas, where he was for a time the top heel during one of the glory and talent-laden periods of Texas wrestling, feuding with the likes of Fritz von Erich, Mil Mascaras, Jose Lothario, Wahoo McDaniel, Johnny Valentine and Red Bastian. He returned to the Northeast in early 1972 as a singles wrestler, before a few months later forming his most famous tag team, with Fuji, Harry Fujiwara, who later gained more fame during the WWF glory period as a legendarily bad manager over the summer. Tanaka and Fuji, managed by a campy Japanese-clad Lou Albano, were the WWF's most prominent tag team of the decade of the 1970s, holding the titles 3 times and generally working as headliners in most arenas, and their total time holding the tag titles are among the all-time longest of any World Tag Team Champions in history. Their most prominent angle led to a match they weren't involved in. At a TV taping, Tanaka and Fuji were defending the titles against Sammartino and Pedro Morales, by far the 2 biggest stars of the era. The gimmick was that both Sammartino and Morales had salt thrown in their eyes by Tanaka and Fuji, and couldn't see, and ended up swinging wildly at each other, and when they could see, continued the fight. This led to the first pro wrestling event ever at Shea Stadium on September 30, 1972, where Sammartino faced Morales, going to a 65-minute billed as 75-minute draw. After the match, the 2 top babyfaces, as the story went, respected each other and instead wanted to face the men who got them into the match, and defeated Fuji and Tanaka on October 16, 1972 in Madison Square Garden in 2 straight falls, but didn't win the titles due to a second fall DQ. Tanaka headlined many of the secondary markets as a single against either Sammartino or Morales during that period, as well as working even more frequently on top as a tag team. On January 15, 1973, before a crowd announced as a sellout 22,096, keep in mind there is no way MSG actually held that many people, as the old setup sold out at 20,025, the final Sammartino vs. Tanaka match at MSG was given equal billing to the Morales vs. Moondog main title match. Tanaka and Fuji remained as either champions or top contenders for the tag belts through early 1974, when they were replaced by the Valiant Brothers as Albano's heel team and Tanaka left for Florida. The 2 remained a team on and off in smaller territories before returning for a 1977-78 run as WWF Tag Team Champions. During that period, they wrestled regularly in the semifinals, underneath superstar Billy Graham as WWF Champion, during an era where virtually every show sold out. Perhaps their most famous match of the era was on January 23, 1978 in the semifinal to Graham vs. Mil Mascaras before an advanced sellout, where Mascaras refused to sell much or do a pinfall job even though it was the feud blow-off, as they teamed with Stan Stasiak, father of the current WCW wrestler, and Baron Mikkel Shikluna against Bob Backlund and Peter Maivia and Tony Garea and Larry Zbyszko. All of Backlund's partners were eliminated in the first 3 falls, and he came back to win 4 straight falls on his own to take the match, which was the setup for Backlund's winning the title from Graham the next month. Tanaka, who was clearly past his prime during this run still, due to his reputation in the Northeast, remained high on the cards for the next 2 months. After teaming with Fuji and Ken Patera on the losing side to the Dream Babyface team of Andre the Giant and Mascaras and Dusty Rhodes on March 20, 1978, underneath a Graham vs. Backlund main event, Tanaka left the WWF territory for the final time. Earlier in 1977, Tanaka was involved in an incident that actually made local headlines in San Francisco, and was about the only time pro wrestling made the mainstream news in California during the era. Tanaka had been headlining in Los Angeles as a heel after winning the 1977 Battle Royal, which would be equivalent for that period to the Royal Rumble, since the Battle Royal was held every January and actually built up as the biggest show and most important match of the year, and always did the largest crowd. From that win, he was the top heel, mainly feuding with the top babyface of the time, Chavo Guerrero, father of the current WCW wrestler. His longtime partner, Fuji, was the top heel in San Francisco, dating back 1 year earlier, holding the U.S. title under the name The Great Fuji. Even though the 2 territories bordered each other, they had usually different talent working each area full-time, although talent was on occasion sent back and forth, and it wasn't unusual for a wrestler to leave one area and go to the other. It also should be noted that the Los Angeles Wednesday night primetime television show on the old Spanish International Network, SIN, aired live on a San Francisco station, and most area fans regularly watched the show. After San Francisco's top draw, Pat Patterson, left the territory over the summer of 1976 with the storyline that he protested a bad decision in a title match against Fuji, area promoter Roy Shire spent months building to Patterson's eventual return, set for February 12, 1977 in what was billed as a gladiator death match against U.S. champion Fuji. It was sure to be a huge draw, But 2 weeks before the match, Fuji, who had held the title for 1 year, had a falling out with Shire and left to work for Don Owen in Oregon. It should be noted that in the history of the title, no champion had ever left the territory without dropping it in the ring. The only 2 breaks in clean title losses were both in the 60s by Ray Stevens, who twice vacated the title when he suffered legit injuries participating in his usual out-of-the-ring daredevil escapades, which made the switches unavoidable. Shire came up with what was, at least in his mind, a brilliant idea. Patterson had on occasion, actually quite regularly in the early 70s as a heel, worn a mask, doing the foreign object in the mask gimmick. From time to time as a gimmick after his face turn, Patterson would announce that he was going to wrestle under a mask, which fans knew meant he was going to use his old heel tactics against the heel, including nearly always winning with a foreign object headbutt finish. And as silly as this sounds, it usually popped the crowd. When Fuji left the territory, it was announced 2 weeks before the match on television that Patterson was going to wear his mask against Fuji. The final week before, Fuji, who wasn't even at TV since he was long gone, was claimed to have sent a message that if Patterson would wear a mask, so would he. A crowd of more than 12,000 packed the Cow Palace, not quite a sellout, but it was the largest crowd and gate for a non-battle royal card in California in more than 5 years. With Fuji gone, Shire brought out Tanaka, wearing a mask, and he was announced in the ring as being Fuji, wearing the U.S. title belt to the ring, even though the two had entirely different physiques. After what was actually a legendary and lengthy bloody match, since Shire basically demanded a great match because of the crowd size and the swerve, and Patterson was good enough to deliver with anyone of decent ability. Patterson dragged Tanaka around the ring, touching all 4 corners, to win the title. Of course, Tanaka's mask never came off. Shire figured the crowd wouldn't know any better, which of course they did because Shire never realized the crowd watched Los Angeles television. Besides, he must have figured, they got what they paid to see, the area's top star, returning after being gone 8 months, winning the title in an excellent match, at least by the standards of that time period. But the word of the fraud ended up reaching the local media, which played it up as a major news story. This forced the hand of the State Athletic Commission, which in those days had a rule that if there was a change in the main event, it would have to be announced at the start of the show and fans would have to be able to get refunds, none of which Shire did. No doubt, the commission, which could have cared less about wrestling, probably wanted nothing to do with this. But the media had the story and demanded action for an obvious consumer fraud and bait and switch. Enough of the fans, from seeing the Los Angeles TV, recognized the imposter as Tanaka. I still remember on Wednesday of that week, 4 days after the incident, one of the TV news stations breaking the story that they had uncovered the identity of the imposter Fuji as Tanaka, something a large percentage of the ringside fans in the building that night knew immediately when the match started. At one point there was actually a chance that Shire was going to lose his promoter's license for the fraud, but he managed to save it by claiming that he knew nothing about the switch, that all he knew was that Fuji contacted him from Oregon and asked if he could wear a mask, and he never noticed that the guy in the ring wasn't Fuji, and no explanation was given why he would have been given the belt to wear to the ring. He claimed when they got backstage at the match, he did notice the guy was more powerfully built than Fuji, and then ordered him to pull his mask off, but claimed he didn't recognize his face through all the blood. Shires put all the heat on a Fuji and Tanaka conspiracy, with the idea that Fuji told Tanaka because the gate would be so huge, he'd get a great payoff, which didn't explain why Fuji himself then wouldn't come back for the match. The commission actually bought the story, legitimately fined Tanaka more than $1,000, also fined Shire, but somehow didn't make the ruling that fans with ticket stubs could get refunds on the show. The commission actually banned Fuji, who took the heat from everyone since he wasn't there to defend himself and since for the good of the business, everyone contacted agreed with the ludicrous story. Shire didn't know it wasn't Fuji when he got in the ring, from wrestling in California for life. This ended up being overturned by 1984 when Fuji was a regular with the WWF and they expanded west. Going by his wrestling name of Toru Tanaka, his big screen debut was in An Eye for an Eye in 1981. He played almost exclusively heel roles of being a Japanese or Chinese gangster, a sumo wrestler turned servant or guard, or as a Japanese pro wrestler in a variety of movies. In Perfect Weapon with Jeffrey Speakman 1991, and Bad Guys, 1986, he basically played himself with his final acting gig in Arnold Schwarzenegger's Last Action Hero in 1993. Professor Toru Tanaka. Career title history. Source, Wrestling Title Histories 4th edition. IWA World Heavyweight, Australia. Defeated Dominic DeNucci June 3, 1966 Sydney. Lost to Mark Lewin July 9, 1966 Melbourne. Defeated Mario Milano September 20, 1968 Sydney. lost to Tex McKenzie November 9, 1968 Melbourne. Worldwide Wrestling Federation International Tag Team, with Mitsu Arakawa recognized as first champions after defeated Victor Rivera and Haystacks Calhoun June 30, 1969 Madison Square Garden, lost to Victor Rivera and Tony Marino December 8, 1969 Madison Square Garden. Worldwide Wrestling Federation Tag Team, with Mr. Fuji defeated Chief Jay Strongbow and Sonny King June 27, 1972 Philadelphia, lost to Tony Garia and Haystacks Calhoun May 30, 1973 Hamburg, Pennsylvania, with Fuji defeated Tony Garia and Haystacks Calhoun September 11, 1973 Philadelphia, lost to Tony Garia and Dean Ho November 14, 1973 Hamburg, Pennsylvania, with Fuji defeated Tony Garia and Larry Zbyszko in tournament finals September 27, 1977 Philadelphia, lost to Dominic DeNucci and Dino Bravo March 14, 1978 Philadelphia. NWA American Heavyweight, defeated Fritz von Erich December 18, 1970 Houston, lost to Fritz von Erich February 22, 1971 Fort Worth, defeated Fritz von Erich February 23, 1971 Dallas, lost to Wahoo McDaniel March 5, 1971 Houston. Defeated Kevin Von Erich April 20, 1980 Dallas, lost to Kevin Von Erich April 28, 1980 Fort Worth. NWA American Tag Team, with Thunderbolt Patterson defeated Wahoo McDaniel and Johnny Valentine July 19, 1971 Fort Worth, vacated titles when Tanaka left the promotion. NWA Georgia Heavyweight defeated Abdullah the Butcher August 1975, lost to Nikolai Volkov September 19, 1975 Atlanta. NWA Georgia Tag Team, with the Assassin, Jody Hamilton defeated Rocky Johnson and Jerry Briscoe March 1975, lost to Robert Fuller and Bob Armstrong May 9, 1975 Atlanta, with Mr. Fuji won tournament for belts September 19, 1975 Atlanta, lost to Jerry Briscoe and Bob Backlund October 1975. NWA Florida Tag Team, with Dick Slater won belts approximately October 1974, lost to Dominic DeNucci and Tony Parisi approximately January 1975. IWA Tag Team, with Skull Murphy defeated George and Sandy Scott November 3, 1968 Melbourne, titles vacated. NWA Southeastern Heavyweight, held title in 1976, defeated Dick Slater November 1979, lost to Dick Slater November 1979. NWA Southeastern Tag Team, with Mr. Fuji defeated Ron and Buddy Fuller June 29, 1979 Knoxville, lost to Ron and Robert Fuller August 1979. NWA Texas Brass Knucks, defeated Bruiser Brody 1979, lost to Bruiser Brody 1979. NWA America's Heavyweight, defeated Chavo Guerrero February 13, 1977 San Bernardino, lost to the Hangman Neil Guai, March 18, 1977 Los Angeles. NWA America's Tag Team, with Dr. Hiro Oda defeated Victor Rivera and Cien Caras February 21, 1977 Los Angeles, lost to Victor Rivera and Terry Sawyer 1977. Caribbean Heavyweight, won tournament to become first champion March 1, 1975 San Juan, lost to Jose Lothario March 22, 1975. The All Japan New Japan feud continued on September 16 before a sellout crowd of 9,500 at the Aichi-ken Gymnasium in Nagoya, with All Japan this time going over, and Toshiaki Kawada making his first appearance at a New Japan show doing an angle with Kensuke Sasaki for the Tokyo Dome. When intermission began, ring announcer Hideki Tanaka introduced Kawada as a visitor from All Japan. The audience went crazy when Kawada climbed to the ring, as expected. Kawada said he would represent All Japan and beat Sasaki at the October 9th Dome show. Sasaki came to the ring and they did a stare down, which was the extent of the angle. New Japan placed the interpromotional match in the main event slot of the card, which was interesting if only because the All Japan team consisted of old Masafuchi, whose career has gotten a new lease on life after years doing low-card comedy simply because he was one of only two natives who didn't jump to Pro Wrestling Noah, and Taiyo Kia, the former Mauna Kea Mossman, who because he's Hawaiian, is being repackaged as an honorary Japanese and pushed to the main event level. Before the match started, Tanaka said that on September 16th, New Japan history has changed and a new wrestling world starts right now. At this point, Team 2000 came to the ring, with Masahiro Chono and Tatsutoshi Goto, the wrestlers, being accompanied by Hiroyoshi Tenzan, Satoshi Kojima, Super J, Michiyoshi Ohara and Hiro Saito. Then Shiro Koshinaka, who is joining the All Japan side of this feud basically because that side needs more depth to give this feud any legs, came out with two referees and started a brawl. The match began as a four-way, with Fuchi crotching Chono on the ring post and Kia immediately doing all his signature moves on Goto, finishing with a Hawaiian cutter, similar to the version of the diamond cutter that Mark Marrow briefly used as a finisher in WWF, on Goto for the pin in just 2:18. Obviously New Japan and All Japan both recognized that it was imperative to create a new superstar both for All Japan and this feud, and Kia was the obvious guy. Reports live were that Fuchi and Kia came across like big-time players as opposed to mid-carders being pushed above their level, and it would make for great TV when it airs on September 30th. In an interesting twist, at the New Japan show, they were selling tickets for an All Japan show in the same building on October 28th, which is believed will have New Japan involvement in the show. Because there were no hints thrown or challenges issued for that show, tickets did not sell well because most New Japan fans aren't interested in a straight All Japan show, and they didn't want to shoot any angles for another show until after the Tokyo Dome. From the New Japan standpoint, the plan right now is for Kawada to win at the Dome, which most smart fans expect, but they are going at this point under the impression, everything subject to change, that the casual audience that packs the Dome won't be as expecting of what seems to be both the obvious but also the logical finish. The booking plan at this point is for Kawada to win the tournament in All Japan for the Triple Crown, leading to a title versus title showdown with Sasaki on Jan. 4th at the Dome, which they'll pull the big surprise and put Kawada over again. At least that was Riki Choshu's booking plan, which is going on the assumption that All Japan won't be able to run tours on its own for much longer, since the feeling is by many that what's going on is temporary, but in the long run All Japan is still doomed to be anything more than a company running scattered shows. Kawada would be like Tenryu was a few years ago for New Japan as a big money-drawing outsider against the regular crew, where he'd be portrayed as an outsider but really be a New Japan Big Show regular, and allow Choshu to have someone to fill the position Naoya Ogawa had last year without the headaches of dealing with Antonio Inoki and Ogawa. Keeping Kawada strong is doubly important for New Japan right now because it allows Choshu to run Dome show matchups without having to deal with the two, since Inoki is intent on making Ogawa into Superman and New Japan has trouble dealing with him and hasn't been able to get him to put anyone over since the big angle. Choshu is always looking for an answer to lessen the influence of Inoki on New Japan. At this point Choshu has no plans for using Ogawa, which leaves Inoki having to maintain a strong relationship with Pride and get Ogawa over on those shows. Choshu is hopeful he can get a good 2 years of Dome main events out of Kawada, and given the disappointing advance for October 9th, it means they have to work at getting him over to pull this off, unlike in the famed UWFI feud, where they sold out the Dome in 3 days for the first Keiji Muto vs Nobuhiko Takada match. New Jersey Governor Christine Todd Whitman officially signed into law the bill to regulate so-called extreme wrestling on September 18th. The bill was promoted out of Assembly Democratic leader Joseph Doria's office as child protection legislation, since it would ban children under the age of 18 from attending so-called extreme wrestling events. The bill does not affect ECW, even though ECW has started civil legislation attempting to claim it coined the phrase and is the only company that can be billed as extreme wrestling in its lawsuit against XPW. The bill was signed at the Bayonne, New Jersey Elementary School around the corner from Charity Hall, where Jersey All Pro Wrestling used to regularly run shows. The bill will likely force Jersey All Pro and Combat Zone Wrestling to either change their styles, which may not be enough, or no longer run in New Jersey, because aside from adding an athletic commission tax to running, they also mandate an ambulance and 2 physicians at every live event, which may be cost prohibitive for events that only draw a few hundred spectators. In addition, groups that fall under the auspices of extreme wrestling, a designation that would be made by the Athletic Commission with no actual differentiation spelled out in the law, also could not run in any community without the community itself specifically allowing the event. Doria, due to New Jersey dropping regulation of pro wrestling, had been powerless to stop events from happening in Bayonne, New Jersey, where he also serves as mayor. Extreme wrestling is defined as events where the participants injure and self-mutilate, blade themselves, and routinely use a variety of weapons including golf clubs, guitars and cheese graters, and cut themselves with razor blades to draw blood and use props such as glass panes. Blading and usage of weapons is commonplace on ECW shows, as well as commonplace on major WWF and WCW shows, all of which are exempt from the legislation. Frank Iadiavia, co-owner of Jersey All Pro Wrestling, claims the bill, which was quite frankly specifically targeted to run his promotion out of Bayonne, doesn't apply to his company. Iadiavia has agreed to run shows without using barbed wire, light bulbs, thumbtacks and glass window panes, and continues sick bumps from high places and usage of tables, since those are commonplace in the major promotions. He claims if the law cracks down on Japan after making these changes, they would seek legal action, but right now are planning to continue running shows that would not be labeled extreme, including running shows without blood and nixing a scheduled bloodbath match from a show scheduled for September 22nd. Wrestling held its own quite well, drawing a total of 9.3 million viewers on September 18th against competition which included the Olympics and Monday Night Football, which both drew huge numbers, although the Olympics have been a disappointment in the ratings, averaging a 14.5 in prime time as compared to ads promising a 16.1 and Dick Ebersol's predictions of an 18.0, as well as a Survivor rerun, which bombed. The final Raw on the USA Network did a 5.71 rating, 5.54 first hour, 5.8 second hour, and an 8.4 share. Nitro held up as well as could be expected with a 2.75 rating, 3.24 first hour, 2.27 second hour, and a 4.1 share. Raw had a rare major turnoff segment with a Mick Foley challenge to Bush and Gore to reconsider doing a debate on SmackDown. Basically they never even considered it, and beginning of the main event, dropping a full 700,000 homes in one segment unopposed, which is almost unheard of for a Raw episode. This led The Rock vs. Undertaker to be the weakest rated main event in the regular time slot of the year, doing a 5.24 final quarter and a 5.90 overrun. The Nitro main event of Booker and Sting vs. Jarrett and Steiner did a 2.61 quarter. Head-to-head opened with Raw at 5.07, Stephanie, Angle and Triple H interview, to 2.33, Booker vs. Sting, Raw at 5.71 an interview segment adding Foley, plus RTC vs. Dudley's, to 2.03 MIA vs. Team Canada, Raw at 5.85, Rock, Undertaker, Foley, Benoit, Kane interview, to 2.09 Chronic Angle with Thrillers, Jarrett, and Steiner, Vampiro vs. Awesome, and Raw at 5.51, Kane vs. Benoit, to 2.61, main event. SmackDown on September 14th drew a 4.94 rating and an 8.2 share. There was an interesting pattern because SmackDown numbers virtually always increase as the show goes on, which is the sign of a well-received television show in that more people turn on the show than turn it off. This show, which I thought was very entertaining, didn't fit that pattern, as it peaked at 9 p.m. with Triple H and Angle vs. Tannen at 5.36 and had a slight drop for the rest of the show, ending at 5.12 with Undertaker and Rock vs. Dudley's. Thunder on September 13th drew a 2.64 rating, which is slightly up from the past few weeks, and a 4.2 share. A few ratings notes regarding last week. We inadvertently left out the September 7th Thunder rating, which was a 4.75 rating and 8.0 share. That number has to be a disappointment because of the hype of the Austin interview appearing late in the show. The two Raw episodes, April 24th and May 1st this year that revolved around Austin's comeback, he didn't appear, but it certainly was portrayed in the fans' eyes as if he would appear on those shows. Both before and after Backlash drew 7.15 and 7.40 ratings, which were two of the highest rated Raws in history. SmackDown was also at record levels for those weeks. Also, Livewire on September 9th drew a 1.6 rating, and not a 1.3 as we listed, and Sunday Night Heat did a 2.79, which is slightly up. The final numbers for the Patriots vs. Jets were a 12.36 rating and a 21.0 share. For the weekend of September 16th to 17th, Livewire did a 1.1, second highest rated show of the day on USA even with a relatively weak number for the show. Superstars did a 1.2, third highest rated show of the day, and Heat did a 2.79, highest. ECW on September 15th drew an 0.8 rating. The Galavision 3-hour Lucha Libre show on September 12th drew a 1.2 Hispanic rating. The Wrestling Observer Hotline was officially discontinued this past week. While the numbers were down, as hotlines have been an obsolete industry in all sports, as important a reason is just an attempt to divest myself of as many things as possible to concentrate on the newsletter and the AYADA show. Mexico. The 67th anniversary show, which will be EMLL's third pay-per-view show, taking place on September 29th, will be headlined by Cien Caras vs. Pierroth Jr. in a hair versus hair match as figured, which may be notable for a big star getting shaved but sounds horrible as a pay-per-view main event. The hype for this show will be below par because there will be no TV in Mexico of Lucha Libre due to the Olympics this weekend, nor was there any this past weekend. Mexico won every match on the Mexico vs. the World show on September 15th at Arena Mexico. In the main event, where Los Hermanos Dinamita faced the supposed Puerto Rican trio of Gran Marcos Jr. and Pierroth Jr. and El Boricua, it was based around Caras and Pierroth against each other, and they did officially announce the hair match after challenges at the end. Villano V suffered a leg injury on September 10 and will be out 4 weeks, so in the semifinal, Rayo de Jalisco Jr. replaced him, teaming with Villanos 3 and 4, losing to Dr. Wagner Jr. and Blue Panther and Black Warrior. September 22 at Arena Mexico, which won't air on TV because of the Olympics, will be the annual Leyenda de Plata tournament, Silver Mask, Santo Tribute, with 16 of the top workers working an elimination tag match, which usually goes very long, and traditionally is among the best matches of the year in Mexico. Traditionally is the winner of the tournament the following week will wrestle the previous winner, in this case Leo del Santo, for the Leyenda de Plata trophy, but with Santo and EMLL on the outs, that second part of the deal may not happen. Participants are Atlantis, Negro Casas, Tarzan Boy, Felino, Olympico, Antifaz del Norte, Safari, Astra Ray Jr., Dr. Wagner Jr., Blue Panther, Scorpio Jr., Black Warrior, Rey Bucanero, El Satanico, Zumbido, and Fuerza Guerrera. There was a long article on Dos Caras Jr. and Luchas 2000 saying he was a member of the Mexican national team in Greco-Roman wrestling for the past 5 years, placed third at the World Junior, Teenage Championships in 1997, won the Central American Games 3 times, but Mexico didn't qualify a team to go to the Olympics, so he couldn't go to Sydney. He made his AAA debut on September 4 when in a match involving Dos Caras, a masked man came out of the crowd and stopped heels El Texano, Pirata Morgan and Espectro Jr. from beating on his father, and then revealed it was Dos Caras Jr. who said he would join his father against them in AAA. GWAS already cancelled its first TV taping for TV Azteca and now claim they'll start doing TV at the end of the month. On September 14 in Nezahualcóyotl, V3 beat Pierroth in a cage match while Rey Bucanero and Ultimo Guerrero retained the CMLL tag belts over Mr. Niebla and Tony Rivera. Rincor Latino underwent surgery on his left hand on September 6 and will also be out for a few weeks. His father, referee Rodolfo Ruiz, also had emergency surgery this past week and will be out for at least 2 months. Sangre Chicana beat Pirata Morgan for his hair at the AAA TV taping in Monterrey on September 3. On September 3 in Reynosa, Dandy beat La Parka to win what is called the WWC Hardcore title, which is actually the old Intercontinental title from the WWC in Puerto Rico that Pierroth Jr. held when he was working there. In a battle of real old-timers, Ringo Mendoza retained the CMLL middleweight title, beating Mano Negra Sr. at Arena Coliseo on September 17. There is a wrestler based out of Monterrey called Suplex. All Japan. Atsushi Onita will return to All Japan for the first time since his first of many pro wrestling retirements in 1985 on the October 28 Budokan Hall show. There had been a difference of opinion as Motoko Baba wanted to bring him back because of his big name and he's got some drawing power as a novelty on an All Japan show. Toshiaki Kawada didn't want him back because he can't do anything in the ring and couldn't work the style Kawada wants the in-ring product to have. Onita, who was supposed to be retired again, said he'd be willing to help All Japan in the feud against New Japan. The October 28 show would also be the finals of the tournament to crown the new Triple Crown champion. Pro Wrestling Noah. Because of a threatened lawsuit by Motoko Baba, Nippon TV is continuing the wrestling and shoot news format on its Wednesday night shows, so Noah is also without television, which at this point is a major blow to the fledgling group. At this point it appears the earliest date NTV could begin showing Noah would be in April. Mitsuharu Misawa has begun negotiations with TV Tokyo, another of the Japanese networks, but they are not believed to be close to a deal at this point. Great Sasuke, Tiger Mask and Misawa met at the Noah offices on September 18 to work joint shows. Sasuke will defend the NWA middleweight title against Noah's Namichi Marufuji on October 8. They did a pay-per-view on September 16 from Differ Ariake, but it was no different from a normal show as they had no special matches. The main event saw Jun Akiyama and Yoshihiro Takayama over Kenta Kobashi and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi in 13:30 when Takayama pinned Kikuchi. Takao Omori already returned from elbow surgery, teaming with Satoru Asako to lose to meet Suharu Misawa and Yoshinari Ogawa in 13:47 when Misawa pinned Asako after an elbow. Omori has broken from the No Fear group with Akiyama now heading the group, and Omori will team with Kenta Kobashi and Takeshi Rikyo on September 24 in Kyoto against Misawa and Yoshinari Ogawa and Daisuke Ikeda in the company's debut in that city. The Osaka debut on September 25 at the smaller, 2,000 capacity, of the two Fujitsu gyms is headlined by Akiyama and Takayama and Kentaro Shiga versus Kobashi and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Rikyo, so at this point the matchmaking doesn't appear to be very creative. Noah will be running a 2-week November tour from November 4 to November 16 with no major arena shows, but Tokyo dates on November 4th at Differ Ariake and November 15th and November 16th at Korakuen Hall. New Japan. The complete October 9th Tokyo Dome card, called Do Judge, listed in order from the opener to the main event, will be Hashimoto vs. Fujinami, Liger vs. Super Delphin, Takashi Iizuka vs. Don Frye, IWGP Junior title with Tatsuhito Takaiwa vs. Koji Kanemoto, IWGP Tag titles with Hiroyoshi Tenzan and Satoshi Kojima defending against Manabu Nakanishi and Yuji Nagata as the first half of the show. The second half will be the New Japan vs. All Japan Wars Yu Takayoshi vs. Taiokiya, Norton vs. Williams, Chono and Mystery Partner vs. Koshinaka. Doing the gimmick, he's now aligned with All Japan since All Japan needs more name wrestlers on its side for this feud, and Masafuchi. Can you believe Fuchi in the semi-main at the Tokyo Dome? And Sasaki vs. Kawada. I guess with All Japan as weak as it ended up, this is about all you can do. But overall, except for the main event, it really doesn't seem like anything people are going to get that excited over. Whether the show is a success or not is probably determined by whether the casual fan buys this All Japan as the memory of what All Japan once was, or as the reality of what All Japan currently is. New Japan again put the junior heavyweights in the main event with better results than the last time on September 13th in Sendai, drawing a full house of 3,800 fans, putting the Takaiwa vs. Kendo Kashin match on top for the title, with Takaiwa retaining in 11:40 with an armbar submission, which is Kashin losing to his own hold. Nakanishi remained unbeaten in his 8 singles matches on the tour, pinning Iizuka, Brian Johnston, Michiyoshi Ohara and Kojima this week. The tour ended on September 17th in Sagamihara. The Chono vs. Fuchi match from the All Japan Budokan Hall was shown on the September 16th New Japan TV show. The September 9th TV show drew a 3.8 rating. Other Japan notes. Gia sold out the Yokohama Bunka Gym once again for the Crush Gals on September 15th, with a crowd announced at 6,300. Again, no way you can put that many in the building, maybe 1,000 less would be reasonable, as the Crush Gals beat Asia Kong and Dynamite Kansai in 14:24 when Asuka pinned Kong. This sets up singles matches with Kong vs. Asuka and Nagio vs. Kansai. They did some interesting undercard results as women legends Akira Hokuto and Devil Masami each put over Gia younger wrestlers Sonoko Kato and Meiko Satomura respectively. Actually, that was the theme for the entire show as veterans Mayumi Ozaki, Kaoru and Toshio Yamada also did clean jobs for Chikeo Nagashima, Sugar Sato and Toshie Uematsu respectively, which if you think about it, is great booking because you have your second largest crowd of the year, and the entire card except the main event, where you put the people who drew the crowd over and all 4 are already established legends anyway, was every match to try and elevate a new star for the future. Nagio is trying to capitalize on the fact her company is hot right now with the Crush Gals as a team nostalgia, by announcing they are looking for Junior Crush Gals, which is a term for aspiring women wrestlers, and are taking applications through November. The women's boom period of the early and mid-90s was really created by so many great athletes growing up on the Crush Gals and wanting to be women wrestlers that the pool to choose from was tremendous, and when you've got so many applicants, it's a lot easier to find a Kyoko Inoue, an Asia Kong or a Manami Toyota. Gia came back on September 17th at Korakuen Hall, which is about a 40-minute drive from Yokohama as they are the same metro area, and nearly packed the building for a series of rematches, in this case with the older wrestlers winning 5 of 6 but then losing an 8-woman tag at the end. The top results saw Nagio beat Kansai via submission in 4:58, Masami pinned Satomura and Kong drew Asuka. Kaoru Ito won the WWA title from Manami Toyota on September 17th at Differ Ariake in a show that aired later that evening on the Fuji TV network. Ito kept using her double foot stomp, including once doing it off the top rope to the floor on Toyota's stomach. Finish saw Ito powerbomb Toyota off the ropes and do a double foot stomp off the top for the pin in 24:02. It is Ito's first time holding the famous red belt. Match was said to be tremendous. This is to set up a show on November 23rd at Tokyo Yoyogi Gym where Ito will face Rosina Elena, a Russian judo star who won a legit shoot tournament for AJW in 1996 and has never been back, in what is billed as a martial arts match. Miho Wakizawa also won the All Japan title from Nani Takahashi on the same show. Caught the August 23rd Rings show. As it pertained to pro wrestling, Dan Severn's decision win over Andrei Kobalov was a dull match. The main event was Kiyoshi Tamura vs. Pat Militic, which was interesting and very even. Militic, the UFC lightweight champion, 170-pound weight limit, fought at 193 and was rock hard at that weight, so he wasn't the slightest bit out of shape, which shows just how much he cuts weight for UFC. and he actually outweighed Tamura, 190. Tamura won a split decision in a match that probably should have been a draw. I had the first round even, perhaps a very tiny edge to Tamura. Militic was the better wrestler and able to take him down and get better positioning, even though Tamura scored better with some strong kicks to the body. Second round saw Militic on top in the guard, which means it was basically even, although Militic threw blows from the top, so he probably won the round by a hair. It's interesting to note that Militic, the lightweight champ, when he didn't have to cut to make the division, fought at about the same weight as Frank Shamrock, who actually has to eat like crazy to get his weight up to the 195 range, and sometimes his walk-around weight is 185, would fight in UFC at. Vic Grimes will be debuting in Japan for one of the indies on September 23rd. Right now All Japan, due to having a crew of wrestlers under contract and the finances being tight, is not looking to add any foreign talent, but Grimes and Michael Modest are working with a smaller group as almost an informal developmental like tryout for a spot if something opens with All Japan. Abdullah the Butcher is back with Big Japan as a babyface, teaming with Shadow WX against the Combat Zone wrestlers. Great Sasuke retained the NWA middleweight title on September 17 in Nahamatsu, pinning British challenger Robbie Brookside. The September 6 NTV News show drew a 2.6 rating. Here and there. The Urban Wrestling Federation has been doing tryouts over the past week in Los Angeles, and are now planning the first TV taping on September 30th. They're videotaping them to decide on who gets the jobs before starting the TV season. They are also hiring actors and stuntmen to play wrestlers because they have the notion they can train them. We don't have anything new regarding the proposed World Sumo Wrestling League, WSL, other than Emmanuel Yarbrough, who they used as a draw and I guess could be called some test shows, will not be involved in the promotion. I don't know in this day and age the idea of running house shows on Mondays and Tuesdays. I've seen places in the US where sumo has drawn very well as a one-time novelty, such as years ago when they did a huge tournament with the big-name Japanese in San Jose, and it was a huge deal, but I'm really skeptical about its chances for return dates. It also should be noted that sumo, as the Japanese national pastime, is falling in popularity as new sports have started gaining a foothold in that country, but the major tournaments are still huge deals on television. Carl E. Stern recently published The Ultimate History of Pro Wrestling, a 200-plus page reference book which is basically a collection of every major historical item, and tons more that wouldn't even be regarded as major, in the history of the sport of wrestling leading to the emergence of pro wrestling in the late 1800s. The history actually dates back more than 5,000 years, talking about wrestling as the original oldest sport known to man, except for running, with talks about paintings in Egypt and bronze figures in Iraq. It lists, in chronological order, the date of every major title change, every major match, birthdays of many major pros, and has a lot of historical background on virtually every major in-ring and out-of-the-ring story in the history of the business. It's more a reference material on the history of wrestling than a book detailing history and stories, but it's very complete at what it sets out to be. For more information on the book, which sells for $35, you can write DK Entertainment, P.O. Box 781, Haleyville, Alabama 35565. Stern also published some newsletters attempting to list the 106 most influential people in the history of pro wrestling, which can be done, and then tried to place them in order, which to me is next to impossible, but he's got the list out there. It does make for some interesting discussion. The IWA in Puerto Rico currently airs in the United States on the Telemundo stations in Tampa and Orlando on both Monday and Wednesday nights, and will soon be starting up on Telemundo in the Chicago, New York, Hartford, and Boston markets. IWA will be doing a Bruiser Brody Memorial Show on October 28 in Bayamon and are attempting to bring in friends of his for the presentation. Nicole Bass made a ton of tabloid headlines in New York after being arrested on September 16 after an argument on a street corner turned into a fight, and she allegedly bit the thumb of the police officer, James Secreto, who tried to break it up. The incident occurred at approximately 10:30 p.m. at the San Gennaro Festival in Little Italy, which is in South Manhattan. Bass, 36, her husband Robert Fuchs, 52, her stepdaughter Jennifer Fuchs, 31, Fuchs' boyfriend John Roop, 30, another friend and the child of one of their friends were walking down the street when, according to the police, Alexander Ronayne, 21, also walking down the street, accidentally bumped into the kid. Everyone started arguing and shoving. Secreto noticed the fight at a crowded intersection and in attempting to break it up, Bass allegedly bit his thumb. Bass, Ronayne along with Robert and Jennifer Fuchs and another friend, John Rutt, were all arrested and charged with third-degree assault. Assistant DA Candace McLaren said Bass scratched Ronayne severely in his neck and Secreto had swelling and redness for the bite. All were released without bail, but Ronin was given an order of protection from Bass until the next court date on October 24. The New York Daily News quoted her husband as saying it took 6 officers to subdue her. Jennifer Fuchs claimed Ronin tried to punch her in the back of the head and slapped her father, and that Bass was only trying to give her husband his heart medication when the police jumped her. If convicted of her 2 assault charges, Bass faces a maximum 2 years in prison. Everyone else was let go with desk appearance tickets. All the media stories did make note of Bass' former tenure in the WWF. Some mentioned ECW as well, but her outstanding lawsuit against the WWF got no play. There was a Lucha Libre show held on September 9 in Anaheim, California after the Angels game at Edison Field as an attraction. Of the crowd announced at 16,400, approximately 3,700 stuck around for the show, which saw a ring quickly set up at home plate and had the matches air on the Diamond Vision screen, and included Sam Fatu, billed as Head Shrinker Fatu and pretty well claiming to be the more famous Fatu, who is actually his brother Yokozuna, Mil Mascaras, Pero Arguello, Rey Mysterio Sr., Tinieblas Jr. and Senior Halloween, Damien, and others. Didn't Pero already do his Anaheim? Oh, forget it. Rhino vs. Jerry Lynn headlines an indie show in Winnipeg on September 27. Jim Ross did some announcing on the September 9 OVW show when he was in Louisville scouting the talent after the TV taping earlier in the week. He did the play-by-play for the match where Rob Conway won the OVW title from Nick Dinsmore. As in you can imagine with Ross there, both guys had their working shoes on. Ross also announced that on October 13 at the Louisville Gardens they are going to headline with Big Show vs. Leviathan. Robbie D on the show is doing a racial hill gimmick that makes Eddie Guerrero tame in comparison. Brock Lesnar isn't on TV yet. He and Ron Waterman are said to be just weeks away, but Shelton Benjamin is showing a lot of improvement. Cornette says he's picking up pro wrestling faster than Kurt Angle and is basically almost a guarantee to make it big, even from a few weeks back. Randy Orton, Bob Jr.'s son, has been appearing on TV, and they are giving a big push to David Nelson, who is a freaky huge bodybuilder who played football at the University of Miami and is billed as being a 724-pound bench presser for a feud with Mark Henry. If Nelson ever gets the wrestling end of it down, he's got perhaps the most physically impressive look I've ever seen, even more so even than Goldberg or Scott Steiner. It's like Luger or Steiner with another 30 or 40 pounds of muscle clumped on his back, shoulders and thighs, and still pretty cut at well over 300 pounds. Standing next to Henry, he actually looked physically bigger, although Henry probably still outweighs him. Jim Cornette has predicted that Leviathan, who is not quite as thick as Nelson, but taller, and every bit as freaky and far more muscular, and they are pushing with the old monster movie he'll push, will headline WrestleMania within the next 5 years. Luckily, any means necessary to get a freaky physique isn't a competitive advantage in this business, or it might encourage people to take any means necessary. Turnbuckle Championship Wrestling will be doing its first TV taping on October 28 at the Warner Robins Georgia Civic Center. The show will be taped for both syndication in Florida and Georgia, and as a pilot for Turner South Cable, with the idea of using the show as a lead-in for the WCW Classics show that Dusty Rhodes hosts. Ray Lloyd Glacier vs. Barry Windham for the TCW title is the main event, and Dusty Rhodes, Dustin Rhodes, Bob and Scott Armstrong will all wrestle, and Wahoo McDaniel will be brought in for an appearance. There is also an attempt to bring Nikita Koloff out of retirement for the show, but that isn't confirmed. Former top boxing draw Hector Macho Camacho is supposedly going to make his pro wrestling debut, according to an article in the Tampa Tribune, on an October 31 show at the Sun Dome in Tampa against Doink the Clown, which, since it's Florida, could be Steve Kieran, who lives in the area and was one of the many Doinks in the WWF during the Doink heyday. Although he's billed as the original Sheik, Edmund Farhat, who was at the very least the most famous Sheik, who was without question the hottest heel in pro wrestling in the late 60s and early 70s and a phenomenal draw in his prime in Detroit and Toronto, as well as a main event star everywhere he went, is said to be in very grave condition, having dropped from 240 pounds down to 150 and can only communicate through blinking his eyes or lightly squeezing if you hold his hand. He's been in poor health for some time. Stampede Wrestling is in rough shape as it pertains to its future. They ran a house show on September 8 in Calgary after canceling the TV taping portion of the show. Bruce Hart did a run-in to build up a program against Carl LeDuc. Stampede has no more spot shows scheduled and has only run 10 dates of the past 10 weeks, and has aired nothing but old tapes on television since early July. Northeast indie wrestler Rick Ratchet is claiming to be retiring after losing a loser-must-retire tag match on September 8 in Toms River, New Jersey, where he teamed with Felipe the Pool Boy against Donnie B, Nova's brother, and Blue Boy. Terry Landell ran his own benefit show for 6-year-old Brett Young, Who Ron Fuller's August 26th benefit show that turned into such a controversial deal when Landell no-showed the main event against Fuller, which was supposed to be a shoot, in Halls, Tennessee on September 9th, raising $2,650. In what is clearly his version of the RTC angle, ring announcer Paul Diamond, no relation to any former pro wrestlers who used that same ring name, became a manager, complete with a tennis racket, with the gimmick he always screws up and hits the guy he's managing. George Gulas, who was a legend in the Nashville area in the late 70s as being one of the all-time least charismatic and worst workers ever to get a major push, is back wrestling from the NWA Nashville office a week plus back. His father, Nick, ran the territory for some 4 decades, and when he finally got around to pushing his son as the top star, it killed the company, although his father was smart enough to team George with a young Bobby Eaton as the jet set. Frank Podbielski, who worked indies in New Jersey as Podzilla, was killed in a motorcycle accident on September 6. He was a police officer for the Tuckerton, New Jersey Police Department. Colorado Kid Mike Rapata beat Chris Harris on September 15 in Lebanon, Tennessee before 90 fans to win the NWA NOW title. Both these men regularly appear on Nitro and Thunder, Harris in a variety of different roles including as a planted fan and many times as a fake Sting. Kid usually as a member of R&B security, and they also work regularly on Worldwide. The Huntsville Times had a front page of the entertainment section story on George Grant, a former pro wrestler turned preacher who was working the area over the weekend. He is claiming to be the original Gorgeous George of TV wrestling fame and was reported in the newspaper story as being the original. Grant has claimed to have been the famous Gorgeous George for probably 30 years. Grant actually did wrestle in Alabama and the Southeast as Gorgeous George Grant, one of numerous copies of the original. The original George, as opposed to the implanted namesake that used to date Randy Savage, who was the most famous mainstream pro wrestling name of the late 40s and early 50s when pro wrestling was a staple of primetime network television and in 1949 was actually voted as the biggest television star in the country, was Raymond George Wagner, who passed away in 1963. Where the story gets really weird is that a few years back, a Gorgeous George imitator, for some reason I think it was Gorgeous George Grant, but however it was claimed and was reported as being the original Gorgeous George, passed away. Wire services and tons of media outlets including Paul Harvey on ABC Radio and USA Today and the AP Wires reported it as the death of TV icon Gorgeous George, and even when those in wrestling informed them that the person they were referring to had been dead for more than 30 years, it didn't lead to one correction or even a clarification. If he, who is now 76, passes away, maybe we'll have another slew of Gorgeous George passed away major news stories. NWA Mid-Atlantic Wrestling had a September 14th through September 20th tour of wrestling-starved Alaska, including some Air Force Base shows. On the tour included George Hines, Chris Hamrick, Leilani Kai, Craig Pittman, Ricky Morton, Tatanka, and Barbarian. MMA. Pride announced it would run another 16-man World Heavyweight title tournament starting in January as it did this year. Ken Shamrock, who had been quiet the past 3 weeks publicly, kind of broke his silence this past week and attributed his loss to Kazuyuki Fujita, his first what would be called conclusive, as opposed to the split decision time limit match with Dan Severn, loss in MMA competition in more than 6 years, simply to not being in shape to fight and that things happened which contributed to him not training properly for the fight. The Mississippi State Athletic Commission, which had sanctioned several shows including a few UFC pay-per-view events, has voted against allowing any further events in the state. Commissioner Billy Lyons, no relation to the ex-pro wrestler of the same name, said the commission has voted against allowing any more shows after having concerns about referees who hadn't stopped matches quickly enough from viewing a videotape of a recent show. Nobuhiko Takada announced that he would be facing Igor Vovchankin on the October 31st Pride show in Osaka. He said that if he had an unsatisfactory performance in the fight, that he would retire. Due to the fact Pride has given Takada several wins in worked matches, every match with him has to be considered suspicious ahead of time. If it's not a work, it's scary for Takada, 38, who insiders have no respect for as any kind of a real fighter, to face such a hard hitter who is ranked, probably behind only Mark Coleman, as the top heavyweight in the world. With Jeff Blatnick handling the Olympics, Frank Shamrock will be doing color on the September 22nd UFC pay-per-view, except for Maurice Smith's match with Bobby Hoffman since Shamrock will be in Smith's corner. Some background notes on Kazushi Sakuraba. Sakuraba placed second in the high school nationals, and then while wrestling in college, placed first in the freshman nationals, beating Takuya Oda, who went on to win a bronze medal at the 1996 Olympics at 163 in the finals. Pancrase on September 24th at Yokohama Bunka Gym will have Semishult defend his top title against Asami Shibuya in the main event. They will also crown the first ever light heavyweight king of Pancrase, semifinals being Kei Yamamiya versus Omar Buish and Ikuizumi Noah versus Brian Gasaway, and the first ever middleweight king of Pancrase, semifinals of Kyuma Kunyoku versus Nathan Marquardt and Chris Lytle versus Shoni Carter. Minoru Suzuki returns against Dennis Kang, and Kengo Watanabe returns against former early UFC journeyman Joe Ghetto Man Charles, now 41. ECW. They had another strong show on TNN on September 15th. They aired 2 matches from the New York tapings, both of which were good. Whipwreck and Tajiri over Julio Dinero and Easy Money from the tag tourney was good. Money is really underrated and his basic stuff is solid, and he's very innovative, using both Mexican moves and some of his own inventions. Chris Hamrick took a sick bump off the apron onto the floor. The other match was the credible title defense against Corino, which was very good, but when people were calling it match of the year, that was a little much. I'd give it 3 3/4 stars, and it wasn't as good as the main event the previous week or Tajiri vs. Psicosis from Philadelphia, but it was a very good world title match which more than served its purpose as far as elevating Corino into a serious challenger role while the champ went over, and it made the title seem like something real important when it was over. The crowd popping for all the near falls made it. One thing about the show that was really annoying by the end was them coming up with their own names for basic moves, such as the old school this and the old school that for neck breakers and fisherman suplexes. After interference by Lou E. Dangerously, Billy Corgan of the Smashing Pumpkins hitting dangerously with a guitar shot, tons of cane shots, lots of good near falls, the Francine Dawn Marie catfight, until Credible finally hit his finisher. WCW. Nitro on September 18th in Kitchener, ONT was a weird show, largely due to the crowd. The crowd was almost full, with some but not a ton of freebies, in a small building. But they were largely quiet, basically there only to see Lance Storm, who was there but in a bit role mainly to put over Duggan, and Bret Hart, who wasn't there. They hated Goldberg, who also wasn't there, with a passion. Apparently Goldberg is hated in Canada because he's doing a program with Hart, because the deal where he speared Hart and got knocked out in Toronto is very well remembered by Canadian fans, and also because some fans blame him for Hart's career-threatening injury. Steiner, since he's also feuding with Goldberg, got big face pops. Russo got a mixed reaction, with cheers whenever he ran down Goldberg. Madden got face pops, although that's because he's pro-Canada on the broadcasts. But the fans loved Sting and surprisingly didn't care about Nash, and hated Booker T, while cheering Jarrett. The show from a script level was really good, but there was little in the way of wrestling, and the crowd was quiet for most of the matches except Vampiro vs. Awesome, which they loved because it was ECW style. It can be said it was a heel crowd, but it wasn't that either. The show opened with a continuation of the elimination match on the pay-per-view that was stopped. So it was Mysterio Jr. and Tigris vs. Jindrak and Palumbo and Sanders and O'Hare and Stasiak. Tigris pinned O'Hare and Mysterio Jr. pinned Jindrak simultaneously. Kiwi and Paisley came out to hit Stasiak, who isn't medically cleared and didn't do much, with a chair, and Tigris pinned him, but at the same time Palumbo pinned Mysterio Jr. This left Tigris with Palumbo and Sanders. She actually did a real good job in the ring by herself for more than 1 minute and pinned both guys with no interference. The guys did jobs to lead to a skit where Nash took over as their coach, allowing him to write "You suck" on the blackboard. Russo came out to Goldberg's music. When he said Goldberg quit WCW, there were a lot of cheers. Steiner came out to huge Goldberg sucks chants. Jarrett got a big face pop when he came out. Nash didn't. The fans started chanting for Hart for no reason. They set up Steiner and Jarrett versus Russo and Nash, with the winner getting a title shot at the Nassau Coliseum, with Russo pushing hard that he wanted it, being that he grew up there. Douglas and Wilson beat Kiwi and Paisley when Douglas used the franchiser on Paisley after teasing he was going to tag Wilson in. Disco put up the tag belts of the FAs against the commissionership job with Kat. This match lasted all of 13 seconds with Kat winning after a kick. This sets up the tag team battle royal for the belts at Nassau, and it looks as though they are going to break Disco, actually now spelled Disco, starting this week, off from the FAs. They did a deal where Russo secretly taped Steiner and Jarrett wrestling with shadows, running down Chronic, then gave Sanders to give the tape to Chronic to set up a feud. Sting had Booker and the Scorpion when Jarrett interfered in a dud of a title match that the crowd didn't care a lick about in just 2:38. T saved Sting by attacking Jarrett. Steiner attacked Booker and Jarrett hit Sting with a guitar shot which got a total face pop. Steiner put the recliner on T while Jarrett put the figure 4 on Sting to leave them laying. Whatever crowd reaction up to this point paled when they played the national anthem and all the storm signs became evident. Duggan came out clean-shaven with a Canada t-shirt. Duggan didn't like doing this role, but he should be thankful. They easily could have given him the awesome role. Duggan and Storm and Skipper beat Rection and Cajun and Loco when Duggan hit everyone with the 2x4 and pinned Rection. Duggan and Storm put Rection's leg in a chair, Stone Cold Steve Austin vs. Brian Pillman, and stomped on it. There was a big brawl where Chronic destroyed the Thrillers, who were supposed to be Jarrett and Steiner. After pounding on the Thrillers, Steiner and Jarrett ran in with pipes and beat them down. Awesome beat Vampiro in a hardcore match that was better than most hardcore matches. Awesome won with a powerbomb over the top rope through a table which the crowd loved, even though Vampiro is Canadian. David Flair saw a video given to him by I Am Smooth, so he supposedly knows who the father is, but we don't. Nash didn't wrestle at the main event. Russo was attacked by Booker and beat up before the match, so it was Booker and Sting versus Jarrett and Steiner. Bad match with no heat. Ms. Jones and Midaja got involved. Russo, all disheveled, came out to the ring. Chronic attacked Jarrett, but Steiner had the recliner on T. Russo pulled the ref away, costing Steiner the win. Steiner went after Russo and T hit Scott with Russo's bat and put Russo on top of Steiner for the pin, giving Russo the title shot. After the show, Steiner gave Russo a low blow and put him in the recliner. After he was left laying, Jimmy Hart came to check on Russo, so Russo got to beat up Hart for no reason. Mark Madden did apologize to Lou Thez on his website, saying the remark he made was entirely satirical and that he has great respect for Thez. Pamela Paulshock apparently claimed an injured ankle from Thunder. It's one thing when they try and put untrained wrestlers in there to wrestle and they get hurt. But when the untrained ring announcers get hurt, that's really weird. WCW approached Vampiro about doing a feud where he would team with Billy Idol to work a match against Awesome and David Cassidy. At this point, the plan is for Vampiro to be out of action until his wife gives birth, as she's had a difficult pregnancy. The only real thoughts I came out of Thunder on September 13th, besides kind of numbed by the bad acting, good lord, somebody sent Eileen Buck to acting school and fast, and please somebody release Mike Awesome from that contract he made with the devil all those years ago that allowed him to be 290 pounds and do topes for 10 years without suffering a career-ending injury. But at the end of the 10 years, he has to take on a gimmick worse than the Red Rooster. Sting and Jarrett had a good match with a lame finish, although it was booked specifically so people would say it was a lame finish. And how do you like that same Thunder tailgate party video being shown week after week, still airing Bagwell, and them trying to pretend it was taped earlier that day in the city they are in? Flair should have dressed differently. And Meet the Parents looks funny. Guerrera is leaning strongly towards staying and may sign before you read this. Hart didn't work Kitchener, Ontario because he had previously asked for time off to go to England. He's tentatively booked on all future TV tapings as well as upcoming tours of Australia and Europe, although he won't be wrestling on any of the shows. They are trying to find an angle to reintroduce Alex Wright. It appears they are also going to bring DDP back soon. Although there is no upturn when it comes to ticket sales, next month will be strong because of the Australia tour. The Las Vegas pay-per-view will do fine because the casinos will buy a lot of tickets. Somebody from the real TV world should get a hold of Stacy Keibler. Unlike most of the women in wrestling who have the fake stripper look, she's got a look where she could be on a TV sitcom as a lead character and is comfortable in front of the camera. Melissa Bellin, Spice, was let go. She was being groomed to co-host the WCW Saturday show on TBS, but the show was canned and they didn't come up for a new role for her. They are finally marketing Booker T merchandise. Steiner and Nash have done almost a 180 backstage. The feeling is that there is a contingent that wants Ace in there and the change could come at any time. Steiner and Nash know their spots are guaranteed under Russo, so they are being total team players for now. The only one who isn't is Goldberg, who is openly disenchanted with everything. Everyone seems to expect Hall on the September 25th show, although that hasn't been confirmed. Siegel pretty well gave in on the issue and Hall spoke with him and was supposedly told that one bad mark and he's gone for good. Of course, Steiner has been told that in the past as well, but at least he hasn't made any news with outbursts in a few weeks. Emily Sherman, Brad Siegel's niece, was openly talking about it at the pay-per-view that they've agreed to bring Hall back. Since they've been building it up for months, Hall is going to be a huge face for his return, so either the plan is to turn Nash back, or they're going to have Hall return and screw Nash, or Hall and Nash are going to get cheered. Also talk that DDP will be returning as soon as that show. Kimberly, at least at this point, won't be coming back. Harris twins taped spots on both Maury Povich and Jenny Jones. No word on when they will air. The Miss WCW pageant for Nassau stemmed from the September 15 Miss WCW contest they held in Las Vegas with Carrot Top as one of the judge. They did swimsuits and an interview session with 3 judges, and Chai ended up winning over Tori Wilson, Major Guns, Baby Chiquita, Midaja, and Miss Hancock. Pamela Paulshock no-showed claiming an ankle injury from doing the ring announcing, but it's believed to have been one of those Kevin Nash injuries the night before a pay-per-view job, since she was fine a few days later for Nitro. Terry Funk is working September 22nd in Amarillo and September 23rd in Lubbock against Storm. At this point, the crew scheduled for the October 4th to October 15th tour of Australia is Johnny the Bull, Vito, Kidman, Booker T, Bret Hart, Chronic, Cat, Rection, Cajun, David Flair, Ric Flair, Disco, Goldberg, Jarrett, Nash, Conan, Storm, Loco, Guns, Midaja, Awesome, Hancock, Smiley, Stasiak, Skipper, Ms. Jones, Palumbo, Jindrak, O'Hare, Paulshock, Reno, Sanders, Stevie Ray, Paisley, Mysterio, Steiner Brothers, Singh, Douglas, Tori Wilson, Tigress, A. Wool, Guerrera, Kiwi, Harris twins, Duggan, A. Star, and Chai. Goldberg will be on Comedy Central's Daily Show on September 26th. The situation on Dustin Runnels is that they were going to bring him back as Platinum, a takeoff on the Goldust character, but WWF threatened a lawsuit and they backed off and now have no ideas for him, so he's sitting home getting paid and does some indie stuff and works for his father's promotion. Conan is going to attempt to get a medical release on September 20th, which is way early after tricep surgery, but you know the deal there. He's been wrestling even without the release, but still getting half pay because he doesn't have a release, which is screwed on many levels. At one point backstage at Nitro, Conan reportedly handcuffed himself to the disco duck to keep Disco from bringing it out on TV. Stream Sports, an Italian digital cable channel, had purchased the rights to Nitro Thunder, and worldwide. The 5 hours will be broken down into 1-hour shows airing Monday through Friday at 10:30 p.m. The shows will air on a 2-week delay from the US, and have Italian voiceovers. Jeremy Borash was scheduled to replace Stevie Ray on the September 19th Thunder tapings. You can imagine all the heat with all the politics involved when it comes to the announcers. Borash is one of the people in the company right now closest to Russo, so he's getting announcing breaks, and whether he deserves them or not, and thus far hasn't outperformed either Hudson or Ray, it's bound to result in heat on him if they put him ahead of one of the existing announcers, one Nitro Thunder. They're going to have Gene Okerlund do a lot more swearing on PPVs after the big reaction he got last week on Thunder, doing something of a grumpy old man character. Thunder tapings on September 12th in Roanoke, Virginia drew 3,651 in the building, which was 1,621, paying $35,190. Raw on September 18th in Kitchener, ONT drew 3,220 in a building set up for 3,827, or a nearly full house, which was 2,754, paying $107,507 Canadian. WWF. Steve Williams, Austin, and Deborah Marshall, formerly McMichael, were married on September 13th in Las Vegas. It had been well known since late last year they would get married, and even of late, that it would be this month, but the actual date and place was kept secretive, and there were very few guests at the ceremony. The new plan for the Sunday Night Heat show when it moves to NTV is to do a more body humor and skit-oriented show with Tom Green-style humor. They would continue to tape 2 to 4 matches every Tuesday, which the plan is to have bigger names and better quality matches than have been on the Heat show of late, with the rest of the show emanating from WWF New York with skits on Times Square and at MTV headquarters live. The matches themselves would be voiced over live from the club, with no pretense being made that the announcers are on location at the matches. The idea is to bring in musical guests, celebrities and wrestlers to WWF New York with skits which sound like a modernized version of the old TNT show, such as the women doing fashion shows or Bubba Ray Dudley playing the piano, or whatever talents people in the company may, or maybe in some cases may not, have. Raw on September 18th from the Allstate Arena in Chicago was a very strange show in that they took so much heat off Angle by making him a comedy heel instead of a threatening heel 1 week before his most important match of his career. Now, if this is a prelude to him doing something really evil and snapping because of the footage of him crying, that would be one thing, but if not, the timing was very strange, since when Angle came out later in the show, there was no reaction to him. Show opened with a 23 minutes long segment with Stephanie, Foley, Angle and Triple H. The key thing was to show footage of the 1996 Olympics where Angle cried after getting a decision, and a very controversial one at that, In the gold medal matches you can see the Iranian thought he had the match won. They showed him crying on the victory podium as well and basically tried to insinuate that Angle was gay. They set up the Acolytes and Dudleys vs RTC feud by having Acolytes go into RTC's dressing room and get beat up 4-on-2, and then in a match, Goodfather and Buchanan beat Dudleys with lots of interference from Venus and Richards and his Steven kick. God, they need to rename that one. Then came another lengthy interview segment with Rock, saying he'd give Undertaker a title match in Chicago if he'd just ask. Benoit and Kane both came out saying they wanted a shot as well, after Undertaker did. Foley came out again this time saying he's going to put Benoit vs Kane in a single and Undertaker vs Rock in a non-title match because Foley, not Rock, decides on who gets title shots. Hugh Hefner was on pushing the Playboy issue with China. I always find it refreshing when two sides, after battling for what's each is just rights in court, can work together to make money afterwards. Kane beat Benoit via DQ in 3:57 for using the ring bell and hitting ref Jack Doan. Very nothing for a Benoit match. Triple H and Angle and Stephanie beat Tanda and Stratus. Angle had no heat out there after the first segment, as mentioned. Triple H gave Test the pedigree and put Stephanie on top for the pin. Triple H attacked Angle after the match when Angle hugged Stephanie after the win. Taz came out as ring announcer. He was pretty funny. Guerrero was scheduled against Rikishi. He pretended he had food poisoning and talked China into doing the match. Match never got started. Guerrero ran in and Rikishi set up the stink face on him so China saved. Guerrero sprayed mace at Rikishi who recovered pretty quick to lay China out with a Samoan drop. Rikishi gave China the single most protected bonsai I've ever seen. Not complaining. If he landed on the wrong spot, God only knows what would explode all over the ring. Regal debuted doing an etiquette demonstration which the crowd vehemently hated. It ended quickly as Jericho came out and basically threw all the silverware out of the ring. X-Pac came out and laid Jericho out with nunchucks and gave him a double foot stomp with a table. X-Pac's run-in got way more heat than you'd think. Edge and Christian beat Too Cool with the typical title belt shot behind the ref's back. Taz introduced the latter team as Two Fools. Finally in the non-title match, in a brawl with a lot of heat, Undertaker pinned Rock with the last ride after both guys got numerous visionary falls that were counted due to a ref bump. Benoit and Kane came in for a beatdown on Undertaker after, but Rock saved him, but then Rock laid out Undertaker with a rock bottom to end the TV show. They did nothing of significance after the show went off the air for the live crowd. Some notes from the dark matches. Veteran Chicago indie wrestler Steve Boz, who has worked Memphis in the past, did a job. Texas Hangman got a tryout against the Dupes. Fans weren't into the match. They had a hot match on syndication with Rios over Michinoku which drew a surprising amount of heat. Chad Collier, a regular with Michinoku Pro, also looked impressive in putting over Saturn, with Saturn allowing Collier to do a lot of his suplexes. Notes from the SmackDown taping on September 12 which aired on September 14. The opening segment set the stage for what for all real purposes were the old Parejas Increíbles gimmick from Mexico, rivals as partners. With a zero-tolerance policy, borrowed from the Bobby Knight story, if partners attack one another. It ended with Benoit and Kane attacking Rock, and Undertaker grudgingly saving Rock. Undertaker threw Benoit out of the ring, but then left, leaving Kane and Rock, and just walked away as Kane laid out Rock with a choke slam. Acolytes beat Benoit and Kane when Benoit walked out on Kane and they double-teamed and pinned Kane. Guerrero went to the Playboy Mansion to see Hef about getting the photos of China out of the magazine. No such luck. He encountered two very tall security guards, and the fact he seemed to be standing on a step one step lower only accentuated his being short. He tried to rush the place but they stopped him. He was really funny. China saw this and cried, and yelled at poor Kevin Kelly for trying to ask her about it. RTC beat Too Cool and Rikishi when Venus pinned Scotty after a power bomb. Guerrero maced Rikishi before the finish. Crowd was real hot. Rikishi did the stinky face on Richards. In what was a great TV match, Tanda beat Angle and Triple H in 5:48. They had hot action as both Angle and Triple H carried things well. Stephanie came out for the finish. Angle was on the apron daring Triple H to punch him, with the idea that if he did, a match at Unforgiven would be cancelled. It was tremendous heat as Angle was taunting him but Triple H couldn't hit him, but he was distracted long enough for Test to pin him. This was a takeoff on a roller games angle from the early 70s that in its day was so successful it made Jim Trotter, a heel making the face turn a la Triple H, the top babyface in Philadelphia for about the next 3 years. It was so good it was repeated every time they wanted to create a new superface and that the guy would get to join the babyface team only if he didn't do anything violent for a certain number of weeks. and the heels would taunt him, pound him, and he'd have to stand there and do nothing for week after week until the probationary period was over. In maybe the funniest line in wrestling in a long time, Foley was in his office. Taz came in and Foley offhandedly said, "Has the mood changed?" Taz asked for his release but Foley said no. Edge and Christian brought out fake Hardys and Lita from the year 2050 as 75-year-olds. Also funny. Blackman beat Saturn in a hardcore title match. Saturn was flying all over the place and it was a good match. It was mainly a backdrop for Taz at ringside as a fan throwing popcorn at Lawler and Michael Cole. X-Pac and ENC beat Hardys and Jericho and X-pinned Jeff with the X Factor. They did a SmackDown Your Vote deal, still trying to get Bush and Gore to debate on SmackDown, even though earlier in the day they released the debate schedule and I'm sure never gave it serious consideration. What was funny was they did interviews with fans, like they did the previous week, and granted, to an extent, wrestling fans' reactions are somewhat pre-programmed by the storytellers, but this was amazing. What was funny is that when WCW used to ask fans who would win a Nitro main event, remember about a year back, with 10A outside the building, they'd literally have to interview 4 people to get 4 people who could speak barely coherent English and seemed like they just came in from a remake of Deliverance that made you embarrassed to be a wrestling fan. WWF has these clean-cut young voters with nice looks, well-dressed, good-speaking voices, almost scary pre-programmed like Dwayne Johnson in public where you can see his lips move but it's like the words came right out of a WWF press kit. Anyway, it does represent wrestling fans better but it sure seemed like a work to me. Finally, Dudley's beat Rock and Undertaker in a tables match. They kept teasing putting Dudley's through the table but between saves and miscues, they never went through. Then they 3D's Undertaker through at 6:34 of a good match. Undertaker has been a lot better in recent weeks. He still looks older than Nash, but wrestles a hell of a lot better. Taker put Rock through a table to end the show. Since there has been a lot of talk about WCW cutting pay of wrestlers while injured, the WWF policy is that wrestlers under contract if they are out with an injury would receive their base, or downside guarantee, while out of action. Since most wrestlers that go on the road, in fact, virtually all with the exception of the guys who just aren't being used on road shows and PPVs, earn considerably more than their base, they do earn less money but it isn't in the form of an actual salary cut, and from a mentality of paying bills, buying cars, house payments, etc., if your contract says $300,000 and you actually earn $550,000 because business is so strong, while injured, you're getting the $300,000 you're counting on. If your contract says $350,000 and you get hurt and you're actually earning $175,000, well that sounds like a lot of money and it really is. People have a tendency to spend based on the number in their contract and they get into trouble in a hurry when that is cut in half. There is the incentive economically as well as the usual incentive since most wrestlers do enjoy performing, to come back perhaps too soon in WWF, which leads to all the things that wrestlers may do to get back before they are healed in injuries that can be chronic. Although as Austin's situation shows, clearly the pressure being put on isn't to the level of WCW where guys who have had surgeries have been pressured into coming back in the ring long before they are ready. Steven Regal did a segment on Thunder, which didn't air, where he ran down the audience talking about proper manners under the name Stephen William Regal, doing a pompous British gimmick. Big Boss Man had his knee scoped on September 13th and will be out a few weeks. Grandmaster Sexay needed 14 stitches in his Here Legit from the belt shot on Raw on September 11th by Guerrero. The prognosis on Tori's return is the end of October or early November after shoulder surgery. Billy Gunn's return may be delayed a few weeks after his release on September 24th. Brian James, Road Dogg, wife underwent surgery after a collapsed lung, and after the surgery contracted pneumonia, so he's still out of action tending to her. Davey Boy Smith was involved in a motorcycle accident on September 12 in Calgary. If you actually knew the number of times he's been in and out of the hospital this year, it would probably scare you half to death. In what has to be a major embarrassment for WCW, there are now 4 different wrestling promotions represented in the Sports Rec video charts, none of which are WCW. WWF has spots 1 through 4 with tables, ladders, and chairs, Rock, the People's Champ, WWF Divas from the Caribbean and WWF Eve of Destruction. ECW debuted on the charts at spots number 5, Extreme Evolution, and number 7, Extreme Evolution Censored. XPW may not have a building, may not be running any new shows, but they still had tapes at number 12 and number 19, while YOLO Championship Wrestling was number 13. WWF in all had 12 of the top 20. The Ultimate Pro Wrestling Show on September 13th in Santa Ana, California drew 755 fans, with Kurt Angle and Takamichi Noku working the shows along with numerous WWF developmental wrestlers who started out at the UPW school. Angle over Christopher Daniels was reported as being good to great, and Mikey Henderson over Taka was also said to be good. Vic Grimes didn't look impressive, and a few of the undercard guys were said to have looked juiced out of their minds. The general feeling seems to be that Michaels was hinting at a comeback just to keep his name in the news, as he does that from time to time. The Taz character is supposed to be based on a schoolyard bully who tries to bully people around, but when the babyface stands up to him, he backs down. The XFL San Jose Demons are now the San Francisco Demons, announcing a move from San Jose to the new Pac Bell Park in San Francisco after negotiations at Spartan Stadium hit a standstill. On the surface, it may not be the right move. San Jose has no NFL team nor baseball team, only major league franchises are in hockey and soccer, both of which draw tremendously well because it's a wealthy community with a large population base and few big league teams. As major teams in every sport, and a team in a second-tier football league isn't going to be nearly as big a deal. Now to the NBC folks in New York, San Francisco sounds more major league than San Jose, but it'll also be easier drawing in San Jose that time of the year because even in the San Francisco summer, SF is terribly cold at night, let alone in winter, and the mentality isn't like in a city like Green Bay or even Chicago where there's a tradition of braving the elements to see a football game. The San Jose weather is a lot more pleasant during that time of the year. In Mitchell Fink's New York gossip column, there was an piece claiming Vince McMahon made an attempt to stop the August 15th episode of VH1's The List from airing. The show featured Kevin Nash, Booker T, Scott Steiner, Sting, and Disco Inferno. VH1 is owned by Viacom, which owns 3% of WWFE. According to the article, McMahon failed in getting the show pulled, and it drew one of the highest ratings ever for the Saw. But McMahon didn't lose entirely, because it said he did get VH1 to agree never to rerun that specific episode despite the high ratings of the original. The article quoted a WWF spokesperson as saying, "It is highly unlikely that took place. It's not something we would do." If the story is accurate, it once again demonstrates just how scary this conglomeration and cross-ownership of media really is. Ever wonder where the term people's elbow came from? The answer is Greg Valentine. Greg Valentine and Ray Stevens, as heels in the Carolinas, billed themselves as the People's Champions to get heat. People's Champion is an old pro wrestling term usually given to babyfaces that got screwed out of the world title in local territories. If you recall, when Rock called himself People's Champion and used the People's Elbow, it was originally as a heel to garner heat. At the time the two of them were doing this, Dwayne Johnson was going to the shows in the Carolinas since his father was wrestling that territory under a mask as Sweet Ebony Diamond. Valentine called his finishing elbow drop the People's Elbow, and Stevens called his finishing bombs away the People's Knee Drop. John Molinaro on the Slam Wrestling site wrote a column critical of the WWF not allowing its wrestlers to do interviews on websites without company clearance. He said that it was WWF believing websites were competition to WWF.com, and noted their site hasn't been only able to get one interview with a WWF star since April, and talked about a discussion with Gerald Briscoe where he said that he could freely talk about his pre-WWF life, but if it has to do with WWF, he'd have to clear it with the office. Jim Ross responded a few days later claiming that he had not seen one request come to his desk from a website asking for an interview. On the Observer.com website, Alex Merves has had WWF interviews through the office, but that's probably more due to the fact his wrestling columns are syndicated around the country in newspapers and just happen to also be rewritten in more detail on the website. For the Ayata show, I was told when the new policy was put into place, which was right at the time for whatever reason we had many WWF wrestlers in a short period of time scheduled for the show, that we'd be able to get basically anyone we wanted as a guest but just asked. It was to go through the office and they wouldn't pull anyone who was previously scheduled to appear. There was talk at one time of pulling Steven Regal, probably because the subject matter was going to involve his drug addiction problems from the past, but he wanted to do the show and talk about it and they let him. Nobody was pulled by the company that had previously agreed. Since that time we've had wrestlers agree to appear pending office approval that apparently haven't gotten that approval. The September 10th Reno House show was in a building called the Lawler Events Center, and Lawler worked the show, but they didn't do any play on words on the mic to that coincidence. They want Big Show to drop from his legit 480, he was as heavy as 505 legit in WCW, down to 400, a weight number he hasn't reached in years. UK ratings for the week ending September 10th saw Raw with 330,000 viewers, SmackDown with 240,000, Nitro with 80,000 and Thunder with 30,000. As of September 28, Nitro will be moving from TNT Europe to Bravo. SmackDown tapings September 12 in Phoenix, the second straight night in the same building, drew the second straight sellout of 13,548, paying $353,888. Moline, Illinois on September 16 drew 5,141, paying $172,205. Champaign, Illinois on September 17 drew 6,712, paying $249,549. Raw on September 18 in Chicago drew a sellout 14,283, paying $443,540, which was the 14th consecutive sellout in the building dating back to 1997. Merchandise was $9.03 per head for the Illinois run, which is well above the usual average. In Moline, they again had Rock and Triple H off as well as Benoit and Jericho, so went with Undertaker and Rikishi over Kane and Angle as the main event, which turned out to be a poor draw after 3 straight shows in the city of more than 9,500. Rikishi pinned Angle clean. Said to be a terrible main event, and we rarely get negative reviews of WWF house shows. They had an 8-man with Dudleys and Acolytes going down to the entire RTC in a match where Bradshaw and Richards actually has a torn posterior cruciate ligament, never tagged in. Champaign was a more loaded show as they did an unannounced Triple H vs. Angle singles match. Triple H was the face, but after he was DQ'd and got a mixed response when he gave Earl Hebner a pedigree. The main event, which went on early in the show, was a 4-way with Rock, Rikishi, Benoit, and Kane. Benoit pinned Rikishi first after a diving headbutt. Rikishi was helped out of the ring and looked to be injured legit. Kane pinned Benoit and then Rock pinned Kane after a rock bottom to win. The readers' pages. Soley. As are all of your obituaries. The one for Gordon Soley was great. Since I never heard of you before Grunt and Grin, it was great that Powerbomb made the old Observer yearbooks available. I ordered all of them and they were most entertaining and informative and brought back a lot of memories. One thing they didn't answer was the reason for putting the NWA belt on Tommy Rich. I can understand Giant Baba winning at the beginning of a tour and losing it back at the end, and even Dusty Rhodes/Harley race in Florida, but Rich/race in Georgia has always baffled me. WCW does not deserve to still be operating, but I hope they never fold. Your descriptions and analysis of their shows is usually the highlight of each week's Observer. Forget the wrestling. These guys can't do anything right. They've got the hottest fitness model in the country. They never even tell their audience she's a famous fitness model. And then turn her into Francine. They come up with a cheerleader character whose sole purpose for being is to bounce up and down. Then they hire a woman to play the role who has petrified breasts. They have another woman who has been fired by every other organization and whose only value at this point is to appear in anti-drug messages to scare people after seeing whatever happened to Sonny. They let Chris Jericho go, but still use Ralphus. They signed Ricky Rackman, BJ Rand, Master P, those music guys in Miami who are going to change the entire landscape of sports entertainment, etc. Has Eric Bischoff ever explained why it took an army of lawyers several weeks in Los Angeles to negotiate the Bill Goldberg heel turn? Actually, I guess it would take an army of lawyers and spin doctors to explain how the Goldberg heel turn changed the landscape of sports entertainment forever. Ultimate Warrior has become the richest racehorse ever named after a pro wrestler. After winning a stakes race at Thistledown, near Cleveland, his lifetime earnings reached $234,126. I mentioned a year ago the horse was just like his namesake. Ran as fast as he could for 30 seconds, then blew up. He still has stamina problems, but has great speed and has become one of the better 3-year-old sprinters in the country. In a stakes race in Florida, where the top 2 contenders were a horse named after a sports entertainer, Ultimate Warrior, and one named after a real athlete, Trippy, the announcer on the ESPN horse racing show said after leading all the way, the Ultimate Warrior was body slammed by Trippy in the stretch. Diamond Dallas made her debut at Santa Anita about the time Paige was in Los Angeles for the premiere of Ready to Rumble and finished dead last in a field of 12. She soon dropped down to the county fair circuit and recently picked up her first win in Stockton. Bob High. Santa Marino, California. Angle. It's interesting that Kurt Angle couldn't remember his SummerSlam match with Rock and Triple H. The same thing once happened with a wrestler I know. This seems surprising, but is actually quite logical. It's an obvious example of load shedding. There was clearly temporary damage that prevented the brain from continuing to function normally. Instead of ceasing to function, the brain shut down less important functions, memory, in order to maintain more important functions, consciousness. When the brain had recovered, it resumed normal functioning, leaving a memory gap. As far as what percentage of serious wrestling fans don't watch Raw, I'd guess around 25%, considering that a quarter of the population doesn't have cable. Bobby Baum. Response from Dave Meltzer: if that's correct, that would leave about 12.5 million total wrestling fans, since Raw at its peak rating has on a few occasions hit 10 million viewers unopposed. McMahon. Perhaps I'm being overly analytical and reading too deeply into this, but I couldn't help but entertain the possibility that Shane McMahon's fall from the video structure at SummerSlam was a spot that was meant to prove a point. Now, I'm in no way undermining the magnitude of the fall or McMahon's courage in taking it, but a couple of things were obvious. The way it was sold in the commentary, with special emphasis being put on the height of the fall, as well as the uncomfortable look on Jerry Lawler's face while he and Jim Ross were talking about it just after the match ended, seemed a bit strange. Both Ross and Lawler's verbal delivery in selling the height of the fall after the match seemed less than genuine, even by pro wrestling standards. It was as if they were saying things they were told to say, but not 100% happy about saying them. My suspicion is that the fall will somehow be used for the Hart family wrongful death civil suit by the defense as an example to demonstrate that even Vince McMahon's own son is sometimes asked to perform stunts from dizzying heights. Even if this were to be brought up in the case, it certainly wouldn't make or break the case for either side, but it may help to somewhat bolster a facet of the defense. Again, maybe I'm looking too deeply into this. I hope so. Eric Russo. Response from Dave Meltzer: I guess time will tell. I would normally think you were reading too much into it, except the day after the stunt, several people in wrestling, including those who are pretty well experts on the legal side, the exact same thing you wrote. Russo. It's funny when I think about it. The audience that the WWF hooked in the late 90s was a lot of the same audience they originally hooked in 1984. I was about 9 then. When WWF started targeting a more adult audience, I was 22. I was also part of the original growth of internet fans in 1991. It was such a different world of reporting and finding out info. Yet one thing through all of this has worked here in the United States: the work. When Vince McMahon admitted pro wrestling was predetermined, he never said it on his television show. The people who knew it was a work still enjoyed the performances. The system works. It makes people buy tickets. It makes people buy PPVs. Good storytelling and connecting with your audience is the key. If you're not credible, you'll be rejected. What WCW puts on TV isn't credible TV. How can anyone connect with a product that switches every week? Russo last week said, I don't want to be on TV to set up his angle, then the next week is cursing up a storm on TV because he's doing it for real. Will Russo wear a sign around his neck that he can flip around when it's a work or shoot? Last season, I worked on your favorite TV show, Friends. I was a writer's assistant and even got a story by credit in the first Bruce Willis episode. When a TV show is written, it's not by one person. It's done by committee. When people say a booking committee is a bad thing, that's how everything else is done on television. A writing staff of a regular TV series is made up of 8 to 14 people. They all pitch ideas that are thrown out or kept in by the showrunner, the equivalent of the head booker. That person has final say. But there are checks and balances with his position. The writing of any kind of show, either wrestling or sitcom, requires that it has a story, both short and long term. A story the audience can follow and connect with. The audience has to connect with the emotion of the characters and their situation. When I write anything, I try to make it so my mother would understand the show if she watched it. I'm not sure if Russo's mother would understand WCW. But he'd have her 1 week up a pole, and the next week losing her baby. Case in point regarding burning out an audience. On Friends, the major storyline of the show is Ross and Rachel. It was beautifully built up the entire first season. Over the next few years they teased and swerved to keep it going, but they were still pushing for them to eventually get together. They've been back and forth. As the cliffhanger for last season, the Y pulled off what I thought was a very pro wrestling type angle. They had the two characters in a shotgun wedding. By episode 5 of this past season, the entire angle was dropped. The finish of this season was designed to put a little hope back in their relationship, only to have the rug pulled again. But the final angle was dropped because it was felt the audience wouldn't react well to it another time and would reject being fooled. That should be the question that is posed by every booker, performer and writer. How will the audience react to the long-term story? Not how loud the momentary pop is, but what does it take away and what does it put into the long-term story, and what will it do to keep the audiences interested? David Lagana. Los Angeles, California. Shoot, Russo double-crosses Hogan. Work, Hogan double-crosses Sting in the exact same angle at Halloween Havoc. Reality: the only people double-crossed in WCW are the wrestlers who still believe what Russo says. Shoot: Goldberg hates Nash. Nash hates Goldberg. Work: Booker hates Jarrett. Sting hates Vampiro. Nash hates Steiner and every other worked feud. Reality: those worked Triple H vs. Angle and Rock vs. Austin matches are going to draw 10 times the audience that the Shoot grudge matches do. Shoot: Miss Hancock is pregnant and that caused the stoppage in the Mud Pit match. Work: Terry Runnels was pregnant in the exact same Russo-booked angle. Reality: trying to sell obvious works as Shoots just destroys the credibility of the announcers to sell anything. Shoot: Goldberg refuses to take the jackknife power bomb. Work: Steiner generously takes the jackknife power bomb. Reality: with this sort of booking, they might as well have a sign above the ring that blinks fake throughout the show, except for a few minutes here and there where they turn on the real light. At least if they did that, the casual fans would have a clue what was trying to be communicated. Shoot: Russo brought out Shooter Tank Abbott to take Goldberg out for real. Work: the brawl that ensued. Reality: the casual fans have long since stopped believing Abbott is a threat. Russo might as well have brought out Elix Skipper and sold him as a shooter. Shoot: Russo is destroying WCW. Work: Russo is the creative genius who will save WCW. Reality: WCW won't last through 2001. Todd Martin. On WCW Live on August 7, Vince Russo said Kevin Nash worked his ass off in the tag team match and that he was a giver, sold well for everyone and was unselfish. He used that to explain why this guy and that guy weren't being used but Nash was still being pushed. Russo said the WWF has run out of ideas and was stale, again citing that Raw numbers haven't moved up since he left. As you pointed out, he failed to mention that business has been through the roof across the boards. He said on a list of priorities that wrestling was only a 5 out of 10 to Vince McMahon these days. Russo blew off Raw's ratings as being nothing compared to the 26-28 rating Survivor does. He said what is keeping him up at night was trying to figure out a way to incorporate this reality style into WCW. This guy spends more time justifying his own existence than actually producing anything. Kevin Dillon. As a guy who works in the business world and a lifelong wrestling fan, I can't help but sit back and think what an utter and complete mess WCW is. This is not a criticism of just Vince Russo in particular, but rather a reflection of the company as a whole. Every department is lacking from management to marketing. The stories have no coherence. Characters fluctuate far too frequently. Casual fans can't make heads or tails of what's going on. The wrestlers themselves are out of control. The promotion and production are second-rate. Merchandising is stuck in 1990. But the most embarrassing thing of all is that nobody seems to care. The ship is sinking. But everyone in the company is drilling more holes. Even when the company lucks into something that works, something that gives them a ray of hope, they always manage to kill it, from Bill Goldberg to Chris Jericho to Chris Benoit to Booker to Lance Storm. It's apparent the booking team has no idea how to build and maintain a drawing card. I've been watching their product since 1985, bought countless PPVs and watched their incoherent television every week. When is someone in Atlanta going to wake up and let people who understand pro wrestling and what fans want run the business? When are they going to listen to what the fans are telling them? I hope for all involved the day comes soon, because they are getting close to that dreaded point of no return. Scott Carbo. All Japan vs. New Japan. Traditionally, New Japan has done a poor job booking interpromotional feuds. Riki Choshu's main concern was never long-term business, but rather the appearance of New Japan's superiority. In the current business climate, he can't afford to treat Toshiaki Kawada and All Japan the way he treated Nobuhiko Takada and UWFI, or even his booking of himself against Atsushi Onita. Has there ever been a more one-sided match in history between two legends than Choshu vs. Onita? Here's how I would book the feud. October 9th, Kawada beats Kensuke Sasaki in a non-title match. Should be hard-hitting. Physical as hell. Genichiro Tenryu managed a great match with Sasaki. I suspect Kawada could get a match of the year out of him if he's hitting all cylinders. December, have a New Japan Tag Team enter the All Japan Tag Team Tournament. Have Kawada and Tenryu team up and win the SG Tag League Tournament in New Japan. January 4th, Kawada beats Sasaki again, this time for the IWGP title. Another great matchup. Book Steve Williams and a partner against the IWGP Tag Team Champions. March, Kawada successfully defends the title against an up-and-coming New Japan star. This match would be superheated as the young star fights for the honor of New Japan. Either Satoshi Kojima or Yuji Nagata would fit this role, although Choshu would probably book Manabu Nakanishi. April, the Champion Carnival will double as a tournament to decide the new Triple Crown champion. Several New Japan wrestlers enter, but Kawada still wins. April, Kawada again defends the titles, this time over an established star. Either Chono or Muto would be perfect here. New Japan is starting to get desperate. You could also at this point do a unification match for the double tag titles and IWGP tag titles. July and August, bring a savior in. Shinya Hashimoto to restore New Japan honor. He and Takashi Iizuka face Tenryu and Kawada in 2 tag team matches, trading pinfalls. October, Hashimoto pins Kawada to win the IWGP title. The end result. Hashimoto is restored as a major star and someone to be reckoned with. Kawada has lucrative rematches for 2002 with Sasaki, Kojima, Muto, and Hashimoto. This scenario makes the most of Kawada and All Japan. The more likely scenario has Sasaki losing in October, going over in January and again in April in typical New Japan fashion. Jonathan Snowden. Athens, Georgia. Response from Dave Meltzer: I actually love your pacing of the feud, but think somewhere in there you've got to plug Ogawa in there because a strong Kawada after several wins against Ogawa would be easy box office. Michaels. I just find it ironic that the quality he displayed that will probably end up keeping Shawn Michaels out of the Hall of Fame, unprofessionalism, is exactly the same quality being displayed by promoters and older wrestlers who are keeping him out. I just find it unconscionable that he could be kept out on what are supposed to be the credentials, work rate, drawing power and longevity. He was a top 5 American worker for at least 10 years. His drawing power was superb with DX once he got a good supporting cast and great writers. I don't think Austin or Rock would have drawn with the storylines they had when Michaels was champion. I really find it unprofessional to keep a guy out of the Hall of Fame because of his backstage and off-camera antics and unwillingness to do jobs. When it mattered, he carried Austin to a great match and put him over, which was huge in turning the company around. I think the most disturbing thing is to fans that are younger, it cheapens the Hall of Fame to keep a guy who would seem to be a shoo-in out. I guess I shouldn't be surprised that politics is rearing its head in wrestling even in places that were specifically created to be free of that politics. Ben Miller. This is the Pro Wrestle Machine. Thanks for listening. See you next time.